We are live, I think. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from the Creative Contessa here in Daegu, South Korea, bringing to you live another medieval sewing party. Welcome, and let's go ahead and get started with my traditional dressing, because today I shall be dressing in the 1470s to 1490s Florentine fashion, and I'll describe the process as I get dressed, answer your questions, of course, and then we will get into the sewing part where I will be working on repairing linen undergarments like this one, known in Italian as a camicia, because like any person who has ever lived in history and actually worn their clothes for real on long-term daily bases, all of my medieval garments are in constant need of repair. So just let me know if you can hear me, and yeah, we will get right started. So first thing I'm going to do is actually put on my gamora. What I'm wearing right now is called a camicia in Italian. This is called a smocca or a smock in 15th century English. It's called a chemise in 15th century French, a hemd in 15th century German, and a camisa in 15th century in one of the several dialects that are spoken on the Iberian Peninsula in the 15th century. So this is the essential garment. This is what is worn against the skin. It's what basically takes the hit from your body, right? This is the layer that gets dirty from the oils on your skin. Ring around the collar, if any of you remember talk about that. That is a combination of the oil and sweat from your skin combining with the pollution in the air, the dirt, the dust, chemical pollutants, artificial, synthetic, whatever, all of the dust and dirt, the detritus that's floating around in the air, that combines with the oils and the sweat from your skin, and that ends up staining your garments. Well, if you wear a white linen garment like this one against your skin, it's what takes all that dirt. It absorbs the dirt, right? You can actually see this one needs to be washed. And then I can boil this. I can soak it in fermented urine, which is ammonia, a natural bleach that releases grease and stain and grimes and is also antimicrobial. It also softens the fibers. I can then rinse it in a vinegar rinse to eliminate the ammonia smell, although the ammonia smell will eventually go away on its own. It can then be laid out on a grass lawn to bleach in the sun for days at a time. It can be beaten so that any lice or extra stain or stains that are extra stubborn can be worked out by beating the ammonia into the linen, and it can take that kind of abuse and be restored to its pristine state of white. Whereas if I were to try to do that, if I were to not wear my smock, my linen underwear, and I were to just put on the gamora or the cotta or my kirtle or my gown, whatever the name of the layer, the next layer is in your respective language, for depending on where you are in Europe in the 15th century, this garment cannot be laundered in that fashion. This is silk. I can't boil this. I can't beat it. I can't soak it in ammonia, although I could probably do a spot treatment with ammonia, right? All of that would damage this fabric and would possibly even cause it to shrink, especially the boiling in hot water part. So what that means is that we therefore wear a linen underlayer as a way to keep our overgarments fresh smelling and clean, because linen is antimicrobial. Unlike synthetic fibers, all of you out there wearing those horrible petrochemical synthetics, well, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but that actually contributes to your body odor, because bacteria grow in those conditions, because it's not breathing, you're not getting evaporative cooling. Synthetic fibers are, for the most part, not antimicrobial, especially polyester. And so you're actually fomenting a colony of delightful disgustingness in your more darker parts of your body, in the crevices of your body. And so you're actually going to smell worse. Medieval people wore natural fibers. There were no synthetic fibers in the 15th century. And so they didn't really have an issue with body odor that is a consequence of that. So that is why we wear a linen underlayer. Many, many reasons. All of you are out there who are doing reenactment or living history or even Ren fairs or fantasy events, and you're not wearing a linen layer against your skin, you are doing yourself and your overlayers a big disservice. Linen for the win. I had an interesting question the other day. Someone asked me what they could wear if they were allergic to linen. First thing is, I don't know if you're actually allergic to linen or if you're allergic to the dye stuffs that may have been used in some linen garments you have worn, or to the sizing that is sometimes often in modern fabrics, especially linen garments, put into the linen to keep it stiff and thick and heavy, right? You might not be allergic to the linen itself. You might be allergic to a number of the chemicals that are in it. So I would recommend washing your linen garments and then seeing if you still have a reaction to it. But if in fact a person were to be allergic, I have to find my lace. If a person were to be allergic to linen, some medieval alternatives to linen for undergarments would be hemp. Although in Northern Europe, there seems to be this weird prejudice against hemp. And I haven't quite pinpointed the medieval origins of that prejudice, but another alternative would be rami. Rami is nettle cloth, and they did have rami in medieval Europe. It's not as common as linen or as hemp, but it is an option. And especially if you're looking for an alternative that mimics the look and feel of linen, without without the maybe same issues that linen would have if you're allergic to linen, then rami is your baby. Rami is it's actually even a little more resilient than linen is. Rami is, and it can be woven much more finely than linen is. Rami is an amazing fabric. It's the fabric of choice here in Korea for summer wear. Rami and hemp. Rami is the finer, richer version. Hemp is sort of the lower class option, historically speaking, on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. Rami can be woven to not only be so fine that you can see through it, but it will have a shine to it, like silk. Truly high quality Rami. Unfortunately, it's very hard to get that caliber of Rami these days because mostly it's made in China and it's not processed in the way that will give you that look. But I do have one bolt of purple Rami here that does actually shine in the light. It is amazing. Yep. So yeah, if you're allergic to linen, Rami could be a good alternative. Oh dear. Yeah, Rami could be a very serviceable alternative, shall we say. Right, so I am now putting on my gamora, or actually this would probably count as a kota. And what is the difference between a gamora and a kota? First off, both of these words refer to an intermediary layer, the fitted layer that is over top of your smock, your kamicha, but underneath of the fancier over thing that should come over top of this if you're leaving your home, right? So a kota is made of, I didn't secure the lace. A kota is made of finer, fancier fabrics. Gamore in the inventories, at least in Florence, always seem to be made of wool. Occasionally, I have found one reference that might be a linen gamora in the 15th century and one that might be fustian, which is a linen cotton blend. But for the most part, they're wool, and it's not fancy wool. When the second one of this layer is made out of a really fine fabric, like a satin or a brocade or a damask, then it's referred to as a kota, C-O-T-T-A. That's 15th century only, though that language completely changes and evolves in the 16th century. They have a whole different set of terms. And the language also varies in Italy depending on where you are in Italy in the 15th century, because Italian is absolutely not a uniform language in the 15th century. It's not a uniform language in any part of Europe. No language is uniform in the 15th century. There isn't one English that's being spoken. There isn't one German that's being spoken. There isn't one French. There isn't one Spanish. So just keep that in mind, that the terms that are used in primary sources from the 15th century for clothing may vary widely. Even in northern Italy, in Venice, they don't call them gamore, they call them vestiti, dresses. So it's, you can't always count on the same words meaning the same things, or the same kind of garment using the same word across Italy. Yeah, so this actually counts as a kota, not a gamora, but it is still an intermediary layer. This is kind of a foundational layer. Everyone, except for the weirdly, crazily poor in Italy, all women wore a camicia and then this layer over top of it. Now, for women on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, it would be made of wool. it would not be made out of silk. Yeah, just we're not even going to go there. But wool is a very nice fabric, and medieval wool would not have been like what most of you expect wool to feel like. It was not scratchy, it was not itchy, unless it was intentionally woven to be that way for use by certain ascetic, pious people who specifically wanted to mortify their flesh with the discomfort of scratchy animal hair against their skin. But no, for most people, wool was made in a way that it wouldn't have been scratchy, wouldn't have been itchy like modern wool is. There's a lot of shortcuts in weaving modern wool, the average modern wool, that are taken to make it cheaper, that were not taken in the Middle Ages. But also a lot of what people know of as most people's exposure to wool in the West these days, it's blanket wool. Wool blankets are not processed in the same way that wool that is intended to be made into a garment. And wool yarn is also not necessarily, out of which a lot of sweaters are knit, is also not necessarily processed in a way that's going to prevent it from being itchy. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Okay, I'm sorry, I've been completely ignoring the chat. Let me go see what I've missed. Any questions? Great. Okay. Kevin, welcome. Susan, Twitchy, so good to see you all. Herb Queen, thank you for joining us this morning. Okay, everyone. Okay. So let me just adjust my camicia. Now, camicie could have sleeves that were more or less in the 1470s to 1490s in Florence. You had camicie with sleeves that were more full. That's this linen undergarment, or sleeves that were less full, like this one, right? There are some necklines of camicie that are very clearly not gathered necklines. There are some necklines where you have lots of pleating around the neckline, and I have both kinds. So, there is some variety in undergarments in the 15th century. And by the end of the 15th century, in Italy and Spain, we start seeing very decorative treatments being done to this underwear, right? We see white work, we see gold work embroidery on the sleeves and around the neckline. And that fashion originally comes from the Iberian Peninsula, right? That's part of the Aragonese influence on the Italian courts in Milano and Ferrara and Naples. Right. And then that kind of spreads. Everyone suddenly wants to have these beautiful embroidered undergarments, which is why, and who is it that introduces that fashion to England? Well, Catherine of Aragon, Caterina de Aragona, right? She brings that fashion up with her. So that's why the English ultimately, in the 16th century, start wearing all these beautifully black worked garments. That's originally a Spanish fashion, not an English one. How's that for a little salt in the eye of all those nationalists? Yeah, so I'm just going to make sure that everything is all neatly arranged. And then the next step is going to be my hair. So unfortunately, we seem to have misplaced my medieval comb. Oh well. So I have another wind comb that is actually a much earlier model of comb than a 15th century one. A true 15th century comb should have two sets of tines. It will look a lot like a lice comb. It should have two sets of tines, a wider one and a wider set and a narrower set. The wider set is for getting out the knots. The narrower set is for removing detritus from your hair and distributing the oils nicely. So yeah. We actually found there's a couple of vendors on Etsy selling some very nice ones. Cosmetica Obscura sells a very nice basic medieval comb, not fancy at all. And it's the one I currently have. And also very affordable. So cosmeticaobscura.com. There's a vendor on Etsy though that actually is selling, I'm pretty certain they're using laser cut ones that actually are replicas of a variety of combs across the ancient to late medieval period. And they're selling them for also a very reasonable price. And I wanted to tag them in this video for those of you who wanted to get a replica medieval comb, but we haven't been able to do that yet. Are you working on that, handsome?
No.
Okay.
Because it's done.
Oh.
They're tagged.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So
some medieval shoes.
we've tagged a couple of replica medieval items in this video that might be of interest to you for those of you who are looking to enhance your kit or add some medieval items to your kit. Sorry about the coughing. The air quality here in Asia has been pretty garbage these last couple of weeks. So no, I don't have consumption. No, I don't have pneumonic plague.
She's very medieval.
I'm not that
Very
dedicated
sick.
to authenticity. I'm not that dedicated to authenticity. Anyway, so this wooden combing process, wooden combs are great because the grain and sort of their natural absorption of oil actually helps clean your hair and helps condition it. So you can see as I comb, the more I comb, the shinier my hair gets. I think you can see that anyway. No, twitchy. I know what Chaucer says, but it doesn't become popular and fashionable until Catherine of Aragon brings it. There is very little evidence of women wearing smocks with embroidery on them until Catherine of Aragon comes, and then suddenly it becomes a big deal. Yeah, but also the miller's wife, her white smock with coal black embroidery, that's, I've seen no visual evidence of the kind I'm talking about, with the lines of embroidery going all down the sleeves and all down the body and around the neckline. That doesn't really, I have no evidence of that before Catherine of Aragon. Yeah. Yeah. But also, just saying that it's a smock with embroidery, that could be just around the neckline, right? So yeah, I have zero evidence of the Spanish style. That is what really kicks off in England in the 16th century and all across other parts of Europe as well. Eric, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so now I sleep with my hair in braids, so it actually doesn't need much combing to get knots out in the morning, but I like doing this combing with the wooden comb because it really does make it silky and shiny, and it helps remove, and I'll show you in a moment. I'll show you in a moment the detritus it's removed from my hair. So I know a lot of you don't like to think of this, but especially in the modern world, we don't have fires in our homes anymore, but we have a lot of air pollution, right? So there's a lot of air pollution that ends up in our hair. And so this is one of the issues with the no poo approach, the not using a saponifying shampoo, a surfactant shampoo, a surfactant shampoo, because we don't live in a medieval world anymore. We live in a world where our air, especially in cities, where our air is just disgusting. It really is. And so these synthetic microplastics and synthetic micropollutants, bond with the natural oils in our hair and do unpleasant things. So even though I would ideally like to never have to use a lye-based shampoo or soap in my hair, I do about once a week, have to, because it's just the pollution is just that bad. It's one of the benefits of keeping our hair covered, though, which of course I only do when I'm dressing medievally. I should just cover my hair all the time just to protect it from pollution. A lot of Koreans actually wear masks on their faces to protect their skin from pollutants. It's not even about the sunlight so much. It's about keeping those pollutants off of their skin. It's not even necessarily about their respiration. It's about keeping the pollutants off of their skin. Yeah, the counted style is absolutely a Spanish style, 100%. Okay, just checking questions. Okay, so let me show you. Keep in mind, we gave my hair a thorough combing before going to bed, right? A thorough combing before going to bed last night, and a thorough combing yesterday morning, and the night before that, etc., etc. So you see, floofy. This is my hair when it's not weighted down by lots of pollution and after it's been in braids all night. Okay, so let me see if I can get the camera to focus on this. So you can see, if I pull it off, it might be easier. You can see all of that dust, all of the fuzzies right around the hair. That's, yeah. Yeah, that's why a medieval comb was a very effective way of helping keep your hair clean. And these tines are not particularly, they're pretty wide, right? In a 15th century comb, this would be the wide side. The narrow tines would be very narrow indeed, and they would be even more effective. The amount of ash I ended up with in my hair for months after a local wildfire was unreal. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the pollution that's in the air now and on the ground is microplastics from, I found this out recently, brake dust and tires, the microplastics that shed off of tires, right? So it's not dirt. So when we're out in cities or even towns these days, we're not getting dirt on our shoes. We're getting all these horrible toxic pollutants. There's this funny saying about good clean dirt. It's not good clean dirt. That's not what it is. And unfortunately, wildfires, depending on how much garbage and litter is in amongst the trees that are on, or the forests that are on fire, or the fields, the areas that are burning, right? That ash is not necessarily going to be good, clean ash either, sadly. Yeah, it's pretty gross. Okay, so I'm just going to put my hair into a simple braid. I had wanted to do a hair demonstration this morning in addition to the getting dressed, but my condottiero slept really late. My stylist slept really late. So I'm just going to toss my hair into simple braids. Yeah, we know that women in this era didn't, in 1470s to 1490s Florence, did not always have their hair coiffed in the most latest and greatest fashion. We have lots of portraits of modest wives in their homes, a bust from sort of the waist up, and their hair, they're wearing a cute little kerchief of some kind or a combination of kerchiefs on their hair, and they don't even have the pretty fringe. They've just got a couple of charming little bits of hair, little bits like this, sort of, that have come forward and are gently framing their face. And their hair is very clearly up on the back of their head, maybe hair taped, maybe in just a couple of braids and taped up. We don't know because it's covered, right? So we do know that not even members of the upper classes in Florence didn't go the full Monty every day, right? Oh, that's the opposite. That's not what the full Monty. Sorry, didn't go whole hog every day. Full Monty would be a different, the other way with clothing. Yeah, good clean dirt is difficult to find these days. Now, how's that for a soundbite? Longing for the days of good clean dirt. Oh, speaking of good clean dirt, I just published that video on medieval dental care, and one of the products that got tagged was by YouTube was Tom's of Maine natural toothpaste, which is I use that. I've been using it for years. I use the fluoride version because I don't want my teeth to rot. And someone posted under there that about this controversy involving lead content in Tom's of Maine's toothpaste. And then I went and looked it up because I'm like, okay, I haven't heard about this. Why not? Well, it turns out that there's a lot of controversy about how much lead actually are contained by these toothpaste. Someone, and I can't seem to find the source of this, someone tested a bunch of different commercial toothpastes, including Crest and Colgate, and it was a list of about 8 that I saw that had traces of lead and cadmium and some other heavy metals in them. Of course, I can't find the original source. I keep finding reports that quote this, but I can't find the original report to see what it is they tested and how it was tested, because that matters. But one of the things I did read is that bentonite clay is used in a lot of toothpaste, a lot of natural toothpaste especially. And depending on the source of the bentonite clay might have lead and might have more lead than you should be consuming. Unfortunately, in the United States, the quantities of, the parts per million of lead that is allowable in a substance may or may not be actually salubrious, but also it may or may not be regulated very tightly. So yeah, I am still trying to trace that down to find out how truthful this so-called reports about lead in these toothpastes is. There's a class action suit. That doesn't mean very much, though. Class action suits are brought all the time that may or may not have any merit. And I was reading, someone said they panicked when they read this report about lead in the toothpaste. And so they actually got a at-home lead testing kit, and they found lead in all the toothpaste they had. But then they found out that one, they were using the wrong kind of lead test. They were using a surface lead test, not one that's meant to test substances. It's completely different design. Two, they found out that their house had lead paint because it was painted back in the 1890s. And so there was actually lead particulate matter all over their house. So it was showing up in their, and when they did a toothpaste test, just because of the general level of lead in their home, lead dust that was everywhere, right? So that's why I said I want to get to the study to see how the study was designed, how they tested it, how many different tubes were tested, right? The structure of a study really, really matters a lot. And one of the things I found is that it was like this woman called anti-lead mama or something like that, and apparently she is an influencer who makes money off of finding lead in stuff. So that's a conflict of interest. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, twitchy, it might be terrifying or it might not be, right? So we need to, I'm trying to approach this with as scientific an approach as possible, because I don't want to be alarmist, and I actually have an automatic sort of obstinate oppositional defiant reaction to sensationalism. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it might not, it could be, there's a lot of dirt, a lot of soil is contaminated with lead. So if we're using good old natural dirt, well, arsenic and lead or mercury, those are all natural substances. As I always tell people, all natural is not necessarily good. Or just because it is all natural doesn't mean it's necessarily good. Also, being organic isn't labeled as organic isn't necessarily good, because depending on the country where you live, that organic label may or may not be regulated in any kind of real way. In the US, the organic label has been so diluted over the last couple of decades by the oligarchs sticking their fingers into the USDA and the FDA that it has almost no real meaning anymore. You would need a different certifier to actually make it worthy to know whether it's actually organic or not. Yeah. Yeah. So my condottiero Ryan makes a very good point, that lead can be, historically for thousands of years, humans have been using lead in so many different applications. And we even knew it was bad. I mean, you can go back to the ancient Romans. They knew that lead was a problem. They knew this, but they still continued to use it. But that means that if we live in spaces where lead has been a part of human civilization for centuries, you're likely to have some residual lead in your home or in your town or in the soil. There's a part of Germany outside of Heidelberg where the ancient Celts used, and I don't remember if it was mercury or lead, to force the gold to precipitate out of the water. And so now that particular very, very specific part of outside of Heidelberg, you can't drink the water, or you shouldn't drink the water. And you definitely should, not eat stuff that's grown in the ground, right? The soil is still so contaminated from something that was done 2,500 years ago. So, it's one of the costs of civilization. It's not just lately that we've started polluting our environment with toxic things. It's just that now we're using synthetic toxic things. We've upped our game, right? We've gone from biodegradable toxic things, more or less, to completely not biodegradable toxic things. But, one of the costs of civilization seems to have always been that we end up polluting our environment with too much of something that shouldn't be there. And then we pay the consequences for it for a long, long time. Yeah. Yeah, I need to get a test for my apartment. It's probably okay, but I want to be sure. Yeah, yeah. So lead in pewter. So some of you might know that pewter. Handsome, could you bring me one of our pewter trenches? I think they're up above the sink. Right. I have a replica medieval pewter trench. Okay. Historically, one of the main metals in pewter was lead. Why? Well, lead is easy to mine, it's easy to process, it's cheap, and it's easy to work with because it's relatively malleable. It has a relatively low melting point. So it was the choice for people especially on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. Lead was the metal of choice. Unfortunately, it was used in pewter, which is an alloy that can contain a variety of different metals. Modern pewter should no longer contain lead. um, but it's very relatively recently that that change happened. So if you have pewterware, check on the back and see if there's an angel stamped on it. That's step one. If there's no angel, put it back. Don't buy it. Don't use it for anything. Step two is get a lead test that is meant to test for surface, not for liquids, right? And then do an actual lead test on your pewterware. Because if it has lead, and you put food, especially acidic food, on it, the acidic food is going to leach the lead into your food stuff that you will then consume. And this is actually one of the reasons that Europeans thought that tomatoes were toxic, because when tomatoes were first brought to Europe and people first started thinking about eating them, they served them on lead platters or lead bowls using lead spoons. And lead knives that maybe knives didn't contain lead, but the spoons definitely did for the most part. And so the lead got leached out by the acids of the tomatoes, and then the consumers died. And so everyone said, nah, it's okay. It's a beautiful plant. We'll put this beautiful tomato plant here, and it will create beautiful red fruit that will look really pretty, and we'll use it decoratively, but we won't eat it. Thank you.
No, fine.
Right. Okay, so this is a replica of a 15th century trencher. For those of you who have heard of trenchers, this is a replica. Lions Court Pewters, maybe, or Lions Court Pottery in the UK makes these. It's been a couple of years since we bought it. So you might say, well, it's a really small plate, right? Like body for scale, right? So yeah, it's a very small plate. But at this level of eating, if you have a pewter trencher like this, you're not on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. People on the lower end would have used wooden trenchers. Again, the poor people had a better time when it came to health outcomes because they weren't eating all the they didn't have all the expensive consumables that were made with a lot of toxic materials. But the wealthy, their trenchers were often made of pewter that would have had lead in it. This one does not have any lead in it. But there's a theory that these are actually not supposed to be eaten. You're not supposed to put your food directly on this trencher. One theory I've read is that you're actually supposed to cut out a piece of bread, put the bread on it, and then the trencher keeps the juices from the bread from leaking into your nice table linens, right? So it's like, this is like a charger, actually, more than the plate itself. That being said, I haven't actually found a primary source to document that. It makes sense, but I haven't actually found any sources to say that. So if you know of a 14th or 15th century primary source that specifically talks about putting your bread on the trencher, let me know. And now that I say that aloud, something in my memory is triggering about a source, one of the etiquette manuals from 15th century England that talks about serving and putting the trencher or the bread on the metal trencher. I'll have to look more into that. Lionheart. Thank you, Twitchy. Lionheart. Yes, Lionheart. Lionheart replicas. Very reasonably priced. When I bought this, I think it was like 20 pounds, which I think is a pretty damn reasonable price for a nicely made, cast trencher. Right. But originally, this would have had lead in it. So yeah, there would have been severe consequences for putting acidic foods on this. The weird thing about that, though, is that a lot of medieval food is acidic. A lot of medieval dishes were acidic because they had wine in them. They had wine and vinegar and verjuice in them, all of which are very acidic. So I'm kind of surprised that it wasn't more of a problem before the tomatoes, but it could be that the concentration of the acidity of the tomatoes was just so high, which it would be, that the results were pretty instantly horrible instead of gradually horrible. Yeah. Okay, so any questions about medieval trenchers? I believe I am as dressed as I'm going to get today. Here's the final look for today's purposes anyway. Oh, right, I put on a lovely little piece of bling. This is a replica of one that belonged to Beatrice d'Este, and she wore it. she's depicted as wearing it on her fillet, but we have plenty of depictions of women wearing jewels like this in Florence around their neck like this instead, because the Florentine women didn't seem to actually wear jewels. They didn't wear a fillet and they didn't wear jewels on them. So for them, the option for jewels was either on their sleeve if they were, very, very fancy, or in more modest attire like this. They're often depicted in their portraits with a lovely jewel just kind of around their neck like this. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the sewing part of our event today. I'm going to take a little sip of tea because I've been holding forth already for 35 minutes. Another good question. Someone asked me this kerchief. They asked me whether it could be in other colors. Could be. Could it? Yes. Was it? No. I have no evidence of I'm trying to think that I do not recall seeing any evidence of women wearing kerchiefs in Italy or France or Burgundy or England that are any color, not religious, not members of religious orders, but women who are not part of a religious order wearing a kerchief like this that is any color but white. And that makes sense. First off, linen, it's hard to dye linen a color and that color to actually stay. Linen is not very color fast. Natural plant dyes, they're not terribly color fast on linen. And this kerchief is going to see lots of sun exposure. And so basically you would be dyeing it with this expensive dye stuffs, or dye stuffs at all, and it would fade pretty quickly. Two, this is against my face. It's against my hair. If I sweat, this is the thing that's going to absorb the sweat. It's going to absorb all the dirt and detritus and oil from around my face, right around all these edges where it comes into contact with the skin. So it's going to be laundered relatively frequently. And if you bother dyeing it, it's just going to fade really fast. So why would you do that? Why do that? So no, they were just generally white. There's sort of tantalizing occasional references to linen having been dyed in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, but there's so far and few in between that it is clearly a specialty situation. For instance, in Bologna in the 14th and 15th century, there was a big industry for producing linen bedding, dyed linen bedding. So not dyed, but we're talking bed curtains, we're talking wall hangings, we're talking bench covers, bankers. So these are not items that would have been worn on the body. They would have been hanging, and so they wouldn't have been subject to the oil buildup. And of course, there's rubbing that happens, right? Like as I move, there's actually motion that actually will help basically seat oils and dirt into this, whereas bed hangings aren't going to be subject to that kind of effect. Bankers, you're not sitting on them in your bare bottom, right? So it seems that household furnishings made of dyed linen were a thing, and they were being produced in. Wow, that's really weird. What did something weird just happen, Handsome? Huh? Did the screen started slow mowing me, so I'm not certain if it's slow mode what I was saying. Okay. Okay, so yeah, there's an industry in 14th and 15th century Bologna for linen furnishings, by which I mean, what do we call those? Notions, right? Home notions. Wall hangings, curtains, bed curtains, bankers, things that aren't going to come into direct contact with your skin, right? So we do know, yes, they did dye linen. They did have things that were made of dyed linen, but it tended not to be clothing because it was items that just weren't going to be laundered with any kind of frequency or at all, even necessarily. So yes, just wanted to put that out there. Someone asked about whether this kind of kerchief was ever dyed in other colors, and I just haven't seen the evidence really. In all of the inventories and expense accounts that I've seen, kerchiefs are described as white. They're described as being made of cloth, of white Holland cloth or cloth from Rennes is the Italian word for Reims, I think we say in English, right? Or from yeah, Holland or Flemish cloth. There's a lot of different words that are basically, they all refer to the really fine white linen, the very famously fine white linens that were being woven in the Low Countries and in northern France. Yeah. Okay, let's get to the sewing. Any questions, everyone? Also, if you're enjoying, don't forget to like and subscribe, everyone. Very important part of the whole thing. If you're on a mobile device, you can just double tap your screen, no problem. Okay, just a little bit of adjustment here. Okay, so I am continuing to fix. Sorry, I have to adjust it a little bit more. Camera. Oh, the camera work. Okay. So I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. Okay, great. See my hands. So I am working on a couple of different kamiche. Everything needs repairs, right? Wear and tear over time. So the one thing that I started that I haven't finished, many of you saw me working on our last medieval sewing party, was the sleeve, fixing the sleeve of my kamiche. And I'll show you what the kamiche, this is a style of kamiche that has the pleating on it. It's inside out right now, but it's got a pleated neckline, but no pleated cuffs. So in Italy and indeed in Spain, I have no evidence of pleated cuffs in this era, in the 15th century. I've seen a lot of people try to do that. You know, they just, if you buy a Renaissance kamiche from a cosplayer LARP or even a Ren Fair website, you know, most websites actually, they're going to have pleated cuffs. Pleated cuffs, as far as I can tell, is a 16th century thing. In the 15th century, they just kind of left them open like this. And I actually have a theory about why. It actually affords you a lot more flexibility about what you can do with this sleeve. One, if you are a lady who has to work, like actually in the kitchen or doing laundry or doing any kind of labor that for which you want to actually have your arms bare so your garments don't get dirty, having a sleeve like this makes it really easy to roll it up and tuck it into your kota or your gamora, and then your arms are bare. Right? But if it's got a tightly fitted pleated cuff, that might make it harder to scooch it up over your arm, and you certainly can't get it up over your arm, the muscle of your shoulder then, right? So that's one of my theories about why in the 15th century they are not, the kamiche still have these open sleeves like this, rather than neatly pleating the cuff. What that means though is it can be a little awkward actually gathering the edge of that sleeve, of the kamiche sleeve, under the fitted sleeve of your kota or gamora. Yeah, for certain. It can be a little more persnickety. Ooh, I've got wax. So my cats, my kitties, my household kitties have made off with my wax. So my condottiera went and found some more sewing wax. When you hand sew, everyone, remember that you absolutely have to use beeswax. I mean, you don't have to. It's highly, highly recommended. I really, really recommend that you beeswax your thread before you actually sew. And this is something that is not as much of an issue when you're dealing with sewing with a machine, because the thread on the machine goes through the, basically goes through the fabric once. It doesn't go through again and again and again as the needle is repeatedly pulled through, right? So there's a lot more fraying and wear and tear on the thread of a hand sewn seam than there is on the thread of a machine sewn seam. And therefore you want to use your beeswax, right, to actually basically coat the thread in a protective layer. And it will also prevent it from knotting on itself as much, in addition to giving it much more longevity. Now, yes, once you, in a garment like this that gets laundered, the wax, medievally even, the wax gets washed out eventually. So we can't necessarily find traces of beeswax in the extant garments, when the rare cases that the seams actually survive, because it's been laundered out. But it's just kind of common knowledge. Use your beeswax. And sometimes if you see depictions of medieval women sewing, or a sort of a medieval sewing kit, especially with the 15th century ultra hyper realistic Flemish artists, if you look closely, sometimes you'll see a little lump of something, and that lump of something is probably beeswax. Yeah. Sticks the beeswax under their arm. Yep. Beeswax, there's a lot of different ways you can heat up your beeswax. Sometimes I'll sit on my beeswax to heat it up. This is particularly stiff because it's a bit older. This beeswax is older. The fresher the beeswax is, the more malleable it is. The older it is, kind of the crunchier it gets, but it can be refreshed. This one just needs to be a little bit more refreshed than others, perhaps. So yeah, if you're going to hand sew, 100% beeswax for the win. Yeah, drink tea. Okay, I'm drinking some more tea. Right. So I have been doing some research, unplanned research into medieval oral hygiene. It just segued naturally from our numerous discussions about medieval bodily hygiene, because of course, what is this horrible myth that keeps going around everywhere? Medieval people were dirty. The medieval world was filthy. Apparently, they just sat around them in the mud and waited for progress to happen. Right? That's this bizarre idea about the Middle Ages. And Handsome, could you bring me the scissors, please? And so, the bodily hygiene, I have amply demonstrated how medieval bodily hygiene was actually really great. And was people were very, very careful to stay clean and to maintain cleanliness as much as possible. Just stick it in there. But, what about dental hygiene? Well, there's a couple of factors that play into medieval dental hygiene or factors that play into modern dental hygiene that didn't exist in the Middle Ages. So one of the big differences between the medieval diet and the modern diet on a macronutrient level is sugar. The quantity of sugars that were being consumed in the medieval diet, no matter who you were, rich or poor, was just exponentially lower than it is now. Okay. So what that means is that, people just weren't as exposed to as much enamel eating bacteria as we now are, because what most people don't realize is that when you eat sugars, it's not just a question of the sugar coating your teeth. The sugar actually feeds bacteria in your mouth that then produce acid that deteriorates the enamel, which leads to the potential formation of cavities and infection, right? That's the big issue with sugar, is that it's not just a one-off thing. If you continuously eat a lot of sugars, and the bacteria in your mouth don't necessarily distinguish on the kind of sugars, they don't care if it's organic honey or if it's high fructose corn syrup necessarily. Although there's probably some studies about one being worse than the other. I'm going to assume the high fructose corn syrup is worse. But the problem is that it creates a certain microflora environment in your mouth that then will kind of perpetually produce these acids. So that's why it's actually important that you limit the amount of sugar that you eat, not just from a endocrine perspective or a body shape perspective. It actually affects what happens to your teeth. So yeah, that's why medieval teeth tend to have, one of the reasons medieval teeth tend to have way fewer cavities than modern teeth do. Another reason, though, that medieval teeth, and you can actually, not even modern, you can see there's a big shift in tooth rot from the 16th century going forward, because suddenly the well-heeled elite, the well-heeled of Europe, and even sort of coming lower down on the socioeconomic spectrum, have access to mass amounts of sugar. In 1492, the Portuguese sugar plantations, in 1 year, 1492, the Portuguese sugar plantations out in the Atlantic on their islands in the Azores and Madeira apparently produced 3,000 pounds of sugar in 1 year. That's massive, and that was exponentially more than what was being produced in Europe 100 years before that. So, and that number just kind of keeps growing increasingly as the Europeans start colonizing more areas where sugar plantations can be planted. For instance, it's the Caribbean islands. So, that increase in sugar consumption completely changes the flora of people's mouths and also the state of their teeth, and it gets way worse. There's other factors, though, that impacted the incidence of cavities in medieval teeth. And one of them is actually that, especially on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, people were eating grain breads lots of bread that was stone ground, and there was stone dust in a lot of the bread. And I'm not talking huge pieces, but enough that it actually ground away on their teeth. It actually ground off the surfaces of the teeth that would actually be subject to cavity formation. And so in some cases, they were literally chewing the cavities off of their teeth. So, just because they didn't necessarily have a lot of periodontal disease, doesn't mean that they necessarily had really fantastic outcomes because they were grinding away their teeth. But that all being said, medieval people were still very concerned with dental hygiene. They were still concerned with having fresh smelling breath. They were concerned with their teeth not hurting. And so there are a large number of extant recipes that have survived from ancient Egypt going forward with concoctions for dental paste, for toothpaste, for tooth cleansers, suggestions for techniques on how you can keep your teeth clean. And a lot of them are pretty scary now that we understand how enamel works. So yeah, one of the most common threads across all of these recipes that I've seen is that there's some kind of abrasive in them. Sometimes that abrasive is salt. Sometimes in the upper crust, it's sugar. And that's sort of later. That's like 14th, 15th century. And then by the 16th century, Elizabeth I is just scrubbing her teeth with sugar like a madwoman. Sometimes it is pumice, sometimes it's ground cuttlefish, sometimes it's chalk, sometimes I found a couple of other kind of chalky, what I would call chalky stones, not that they're made of chalk, but they're, that kind of friable, whereas they're not hard to grind. Cuttlefish bones are really easy to grind, and cuttlefish bones were used in pounce to when you were preparing your medieval page for a piece of vellum, for calligraphy or illumination, you would actually scrub it with the ground cuttle bone, so that it would actually make it not a shiny, smooth surface, but it would actually basically raise the nap of the vellum so that it would actually absorb, it would actually retain your ink and your paint, and it wouldn't just slide off the page. So cuttlefish bone, very, very common everywhere across Europe in this era, and they were using it to polish their teeth. So a lot of these recipes talk about, if you want your teeth to be white and gleaming like pearls, then make this wonderfully abrasive concoction of a variety of powders. And usually there was some nice things added in there too, like mint or cloves. And then polish your teeth with this concoction of abrasives and a rag, and then your teeth shall glow like the moon. It's like, oh my God. Yes, they would be white. Your teeth would be white, but you're also removing the protective enamel from them, which probably also means that just thinking about this, I bet tooth sensitivity was probably more of an issue with medieval people, which is why some of the health manuals talk about Hildegard von Bingen. Twitchy, you'll love this one. Hildegard von Bingen says that you should do a mouthwash. She says after she actually recognized, she prescribes this this mouthwash / toothpaste that is acidic, but she says that afterwards you should wash your mouth out with cool water, not with hot water, because cool water is better for your mouth. So she acknowledged that there were better outcomes if you didn't just leave this acid in your mouth. It was a wine-based, right? It was a wine-based mouthwash, wine and some herbs. And I don't remember what the specific herbs were on hand. I just tripped across this morning. But she actually says that you need to rinse your mouth out with water after this, which would hopefully help neutralize the effects of the acid. But obviously the acid in the wine, probably some studies have been done that even though the wine itself was not necessarily acidic enough to be an antiseptic, your average standard wine, there is apparently a reduction in streptococcus. Of wine specifically has an impact on streptococcus, so strep. And that would definitely lead to better health outcomes, and might even have helped reduce the incidence of certain more chronic diseases like cancer. I don't know. I'd have to look into that. Yeah, Twitchy, your girl. Yep. So yeah, these pastes and these mouthwashes, a lot of the mouthwashes are wine-based. There is a 14th century French physician who publishes a whole, a whole health manual that has a whole section on dental care. He actually suggests brandy. Now, I have to go and look and see what brandy was in the 14th century because I don't think it's what we think of as brandy. But either way, that would be, it would, if it, even if it's just fortified wine, um, then it would be something, it would definitely be more potent than wine would be. So yeah, they definitely, medieval people understood the importance of brushing your teeth, of cleaning your teeth, of mouthwashes. It's just that the way they achieved that was not necessarily the best. But honestly, there's a lot of people doing some really scary things to their teeth these days. One of the manuals I read suggested that you should use a soft stick to clean your teeth, specifically rosemary, juniper, and made of rosemary, juniper, or cypress wood. And I think the implication was that the end should be frayed so that it's more brush-like, but you should use this softer stick rather than a sharp metal object to clean your teeth, because some other contemporaries of this individual prescribe using metal toothpicks to pick at your teeth and to scrub away the plaque buildup, basically, which if you don't do it correctly, you're going to do more damage to your teeth. So it was very interesting that this one author recognized that you should brush your teeth with something that's not too hard, and then therefore recommended woods that were softer in nature. Miswak, yeah, miswak, the Arabs use. So depending on where you are in Europe, there are different kinds of root on which people are chewing to help whiten their teeth. Actually, there's a bunch of, when it comes to white teeth, people really, and this is the other thing, so many manuals of hygiene and oral hygiene, especially from the ancient Egyptians going forward, talk about the importance of white teeth. So again, people cared. They cared that their teeth were white. They, they wanted to be clean. They wanted their breath to smell nice, and they wanted their teeth to be white. So again, this completely puts a lie to the idea of the dirty, stinky Middle Ages. It's just all the evidence speaks to the contrary. But one of the possibly mechanical, but slash mechanical, chemical-mechanical ways that different physicians prescribe to keep your teeth white is to chew on a couple of different kinds of root. And I wanted to chase this up and actually look into the properties of these roots to see if it was actually possibly effective, right? If there's some kind of natural bleaching agent in it, some kind of antimicrobial effect that would allow your teeth to stay more white. I don't know. It was very interesting. One of them was starwort. I've never heard of starwort before, and I didn't have a chance to look it up. But one of the roots that people in, I think, southern Italy, he was a Sicilian physician. He prescribed from the 12th century, from Salerno. He prescribed chewing on starwort. So if any of you know what starwort is or have any idea about its properties and why that might actually lead to a whitening of the teeth, do let me know. I'm going to look into it, but I'm very interested to find out. Okay, comment. Let me see. Not to mention iron, silver, copper, alloy oxides will also stain enamel as well as damage it. Why do your teeth have stripes? Yeah, probably people acknowledge that too. Hildegard von Bingen, again, your girl Twitchy, she actually also, it's very clear that medieval people understood plaque. They understood not necessarily the microbial mechanism behind plaque formation, but they understood that it built up, and they understood that if you let it build up, it will keep going, and it will harden. So Hildegard von Bingen actually says in the morning, one of the first things you should do is wake up and do a mouth gargle of just water. She says to loosen the mucus, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. If you wake up in the morning and you scrape your teeth, you're going to find this white, thick substance that might seem like mucus, especially to someone who doesn't know the difference, medically speaking. Right? She says to loosen the mucus, soften the mucus that is formed in the night and rinse it out. Do a mouth gurgle with cold water, well, cool water, not hot water, she says. Again, possibly acknowledging that medieval people had more sensitive teeth than we do, right? So she actually says to do a proper mouth gargle to loosen the mucus that forms, and she says, so that it does not harden. So here's Hildegard von Bingen, this polymath from the 12th century, who understands that mucus, that white substance that's around the base of your teeth, will harden into plaque if you don't remove it, right? And she prescribes just gurgling, doing a gargle of just water and rinsing your mouth out every morning. So again, this is part of that daily routine. Everyone, what fascinates me about the Middle Ages is daily life. And so all of these different medical treatises offer us a potential window into how people could have actually lived their daily lives. Now, you might say to me, well, yes, but those treatises were meant only for the doctors. And so they would never actually, none of that information would ever reach anyone else who couldn't afford an expensive physician. Nonsense. Nonsense. A lot of these treatises, especially in the 12th century, they're originally composed in the vernacular. They're composed in the case of the Salernitane ones, in Sicilian, in the southern Italian dialect. And yes, then they get translated into Latin, which would make them accessible only to a certain class of society. But those physicians are reading those texts. They're going to teach other physicians. They're going to teach pharmacists. They're going to treat their patients using the advice that is given in there. And that will then pass into a folk form of medicine, right? Just like today, where, I go to my doctor gives me advice, then my friend and I are talking, and my friend says, well, I have these symptoms. And I say, well, I had those symptoms. Here's what my doctor told me, right? And then she'll tell that to another friend who might not be able to afford the kind of doctor I could afford, but that advice gets passed on and becomes part of the folk understanding of medicine. So yes, you can claim that these treatises would only have been accessible by a very elite portion of society, but that doesn't mean that the information that was in there stayed only in those treatises. Fight me. Jorge, hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenido. ¿Qué estás haciendo allí en Ecuador? Today it is Lunar New Year, by the way. Happy New Year, everyone who celebrates the lunar calendar. We are now in the year of the horse. The horse, my favoritist of animals. Yes, I know you're all going to say I'm a kitty servitor, but kitties they're not the same. They're a different category from horses. Oh, tea drinking. Yes. Tea. Yes. Okay. So tea, coming from Camellia sinensis, the actual tea plant, the tea shrub, the tea weed, that's not a medieval European thing. No evidence of tea leaves having made their way into medieval Europe. The earliest evidence I have is a gift from, I think, Ming China of a mass tea leaves to, and I forget if it was the Portuguese court, and they were just looked at as being a bunch of dead leaves and thrown away, despite the fact that they were like top caliber puer tea. Yeah, so no, they didn't have tea as in proper tea, Camellia sinensis, in medieval Europe, but they absolutely had a variety of tisanes, herbal concoctions, herbal steepings that were used both medicinally, but also just to drink for pleasure. And I mentioned this in our last medieval sewing party, but it's relevant, so I'll mention it again. In the 1391 Goodman of Paris, the Ménagier de Paris, he actually provides several recipes, a couple of different recipes for herb infused water, basically, that you should then serve to your guests. And some of the herbs that I remember offhand, rose petals, basil, I think rue or pennyroyal, but don't hold me to that. But the ones that stuck out particularly, lavender, rue, or lavender, roses, and basil. But there were, I think, sage also, actually. So yeah, there is evidence in medieval Europe that people also drank tisanes, herbal concoctions, herbal steeped infused water, spa water, basically. But for the most part, most people drank small ale or small beer, which is the second brewing of a mash of beer or ale, and would only have like 1 to 3% alcohol, so it's more like a kombucha than like beer. And wine, they would drink wine diluted, usually cut in half, 1-to-1 water to wine. Really temperate rulers such as Philip, Duke of Burgundy, the good by reputation, he drank 1, 2, 3. So 1 part wine, 3 parts water. And he was famous for being a particularly temperate and just ruler. So if you want to be a temperate and just ruler, cut your wine by 3. You will appreciate the effect, I guess, in history. But seriously, chilled wine that is chilled, that has been diluted by water, is so refreshing on a hot summer day. It really is. Yeah, right. Yeah, Twitchy says half of Hildegard von Bingen's medical treatments were herb-infused waters or wine. Yep. Although, the question there, Twitchy, of course, is how many of those treatments were then just consumed as a beverage, right? That's the question. And I have no answer for that. That's why we then have to look at other sources that might casually mention the kinds of things people are drinking. But that's why the Ménagier de Paris is so excellent, because it actually talks about this being a drink, a beverage you should have on hand to serve your guests. Yeah. Okay, wait, I missed a question. Let me see. Ahora cenando, allí donde usted se encuentra, ¿están celebrando carnaval? No, no estamos celebrando carnivales, sino Nuevo Año. Nuevo Año de la Luna, lunar, Nuevo Año lunar. I guess that's how we would say that. I've never had to have this conversation in Spanish. Yeah, we are celebrating the Lunar New Year because we are currently in Korea. And today is Lunar New Year Day. So today is the day when a lot of families are going to if they're wealthy and have mountain graves, they're going to their mountain grave plots and they're performing ancestral rites. They will bring a whole host of really wonderful food that's been prepared. They'll lay it out on this altar on these beautiful platters. They will burn incense and they will basically kind of communicate with their deceased, say prayers to ensure their happiness in the afterlife. They'll entreat them for blessings for the year to come, and then they will eat the food. A lot of my friends are telling me, though, they no longer make the food for the Lunar New Year ancestral rites. They basically get it from a catering company. A lot of Korean women are no longer interested in spending 4 days cooking. It's kind of like the way a lot of families in the US are no longer cooking for Thanksgiving. They're, getting the complete meal deal from Costco or whatever. Same thing is happening here. So there's a lot of companies that specialize in providing feasts, for traditional feasts, for weddings and 100-day celebrations of a baby and 1-year celebrations of the baby, Lunar New Year, and Solal, which is Lunar New Year, and Chuseok, which is Korean Thanksgiving. So yeah, many of my friends are no longer spending 4 days cooking for an hour's worth of eating. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Sí, tienes razón. Jorge, es el año del caballo. Sí. But I don't remember what color horse it is. Handsome, what color is the horse?
What horse?
The New Year horse. Last year was the blue dragon. Right? I don't remember what color the horse is this year, but yeah. Es el año del caballo. Sí, lo es. Yep. So yeah, there's a lot of tea, not so much in medieval Europe, but infused water, 100%. I am a tea junkie, many of you know. It's one of the things I harp about on my travel channel when I do a flight review or a hotel review, and it's supposedly an upper end product that they're selling me and they don't have quality tea. I lose my shit a little bit. Excuse my language. I mean, that's a bit of an overstatement, but I'm frustrated if you're paying $3,000 to $5,000 round trip for a business class flight, or even one way for a business class flight, and they give you garbage tea sweepings. No, that's a hard. If you're in a 5-star hotel and they've got garbage tea sweepings in the hot drink beverage area, that's part of your 5-star experience. No, that's a loss. That's a fail. That's a big fail for me. So yeah, I'm definitely a tea junkie. I drink tea all day, every day. I prefer green tea, but I love oolong. I like white tea. There's some black teas that I like more than others. Also depends on the context. Definitely a tea person, but even I will say, despite being a tea person, I managed to go without during my 2-week living history events very often. I just drink infused water instead, or just, God forbid, plain water. Yeah. So I'm just doing what's called a blind stitch. And let me show you why it's called a blind stitch, right? I can get this to actually show. Right, it's called a blind stitch because it barely shows up on either the front or the back. And the benefit to a blind stitch, I have a tutorial on the blind stitch on my YouTube channel if you want to learn how to do it. The blind stitch, look up blind stitch. The blind stitch is beneficial because it basically exposes, it's like it's a species of whip stitch, and it exposes it covers as much of your thread up as possible, hides it in the folds of the edge of the hem so that it actually lasts longer. A standard whip stitch is going to wear away way faster than a blind stitch will. And the other nice thing about a blind stitch is that it doesn't show up very much on the front side, except when you're not paying attention to what you're doing because you're talking about dental hygiene in the Middle Ages. But it shouldn't show up very much on the front side if you're doing a good blind stitch. So it ends up being almost a magical kind of edge finishing because there's so little traces of it. Let me see. I couldn't live without my Earl Grey. Well, Twitchy, just make sure that in Spain, you definitely want to make sure to bring your own tea. That's how much of a tea snob I am. I actually bring what I call emergency tea with me wherever I go, just in case the place I'm staying or the plane I'm on doesn't offer a decent tea. That's how much of a tea junkie I am. And especially one of the things we love about traveling in Asia is that this is tea country, tea continent. And so a lot of places have tea plantations, and we can go visit the tea plantation and walk in the tea fields and enjoy the peace and quiet of the experience. And then we can go to the gift shop and buy whole leaf tea that's nearly always infinitely cheaper than it would be to buy it at any store in the West. I mean, yeah, it's always cheaper. It's always way cheaper. It's shockingly cheaper to buy a pound of quality loose leaf green tea in Thailand versus that exact same tea in the US somewhere. So yeah, one of the perks of traveling to places like that. Just going to mention something about tea. Traveling, tea. Darn it. There was a ancillary thought there, but bringing your tea with you. Oh, yes. We were in Barcelona in October, and there is this lovely, lovely tea house there called the Ca de Oro. I think it's called the Ca de Oro, the Golden House. And it's a charming little tea house. It's a proper tea house, a tea room in a 15th century building. Beautiful exposed stone walls, wooden beams, the whole 9 yards. Wonderful atmosphere. The owner and the staff really know their product really well. You can get beautiful little pots of tea, and they are now serving a tea that is actually grown in Portugal. Portugal now has a tea plantation, and it's an organic tea farm. And they now are producing their production it's relatively new, but their tea fields are finally producing enough that they are able to actually sell some of their tea. And we bought some of their tea because it was just so delicious. Yeah, so if you're in Europe and you're in Portugal, you should definitely go and find that tea plantation. I don't remember what the name is, but I'm confident if you look up Portugal tea plantation, there'll be one. You should go there and procure some of their tea. Or if you're in Barcelona, go to the Ca de Oro, and then you can buy some of this delicious Portuguese tea from there. Yeah, I love the idea that Portugal is expanding its economic opportunities into the field of organic tea production. Do any of you have a favorite tea? I am a big fan of the green teas that are grown in Korea. They are just so fresh and grassy. I love a good Japanese green tea, sencha. I especially like the more delicate ones. A lot of Japanese green teas are steamed, so they're as part of the processing, and so they actually retain the most micronutrients of any of the teas. So yeah, tea for me is what is it they say? Your food and your drink should be medicine as well as nourishment. Yeah, I definitely ascribe to that approach to life. Oh, speaking of food, have you all seen the video I just published about the success that was our torta bianca? So the torta bianca that we made together in my most recent medieval cooking show turned out amazing. Oh my God, it is so delicious. I'm so happy with how it turned out, and it created this really remarkable bit of alchemy, of baking alchemy. Um, Basically, oh shoot, I stuck that needle in there. There it is. Basically, it turned out it striated into two layers. And so the bottom layer is this silky custard, and the pounded ginger that we put in it, that silky layer of custard is kind of where the ginger settled. And then on top of that, the top half has more of a texture of cheesecake, not quite like a modern New York cheesecake, but more cheesecake-like. And and it's just so delightfully flavorful, not overly sweet, just sweet enough to hit that sweet tooth, the need for sweet, but not sweet enough to make you wish to make you regret your life choices, right? Just sweet enough. And the rose water on top, chef's kiss. Absolutely chef's kiss. The rose water combined with the gentle ginger, yeah, super delicious. Now, what's interesting is because I used pasture-raised eggs, what I call happy chicken eggs, and Kerrygold Irish butter, it is definitely not very bianca. It's more like yellow. It's more like amarillo. It's because, all of that vitamin K and vitamin A just makes it this really beautiful color of gold, not of white, which is, I think, why the recipe offers you the options of one egg whites instead of whole eggs if you want a torta bianca, and also offers you the option of lard, because lard is pretty much always going to be white. And so if you use the lard instead of the butter, the lard will create that whiteness. Now here, I want to try this recipe again, and this time I'm going to do it with the egg whites, and I'm going to do it with lard. Hear me out. I think, so what happened with the butter, at first, when it was baking, I took a peek at it, and the butter had kind of all melted and turned into butter oil, ghee, basically. But as it baked, what happened is the butter settled down into the crust, and it infused the crust with this rich buttery taste. And so the part of the crust that was right against the baking, against the pan, against the torta, the torta pan, it actually got like crunchy and flaky. And then the part that wasn't right against the pan got kind of soft and delightfully chewy, but buttery chewy. And so I think that same thing will happen with the lard. I don't think the lard is going to be a prominent part of the custard of the cheesecake. I think it's going to actually end up settling also into the crust. And as we all know, lard crusts are amazing. So I want to try it again with the lard and see if my theory is correct. Let's see. Fire horse. Oh, it's the fire horse. The element associated with this year's horse is fire. Interesting. I like the Valentine's blend from Harney's. It's a chocolate tea with rosebuds. I love London Fog too. Oh, Harney's. So Harney's tea. Handsome, can you tag Harney's tea, please? Good. Okay. I love Harney's teas. They are super. If I'm traveling and I can't see anything. I mean, I can see me, and I can see your comments, everyone. Harney's teas, if I go to a lounge or a hotel, or if I'm on a flight where they are serving Harney's teas, I am a happy camper. Harney's teas are extremely high quality. And they're now, I have no way to prove this because I haven't gone to their plantations. They claim to be grown on sustainably farmed tea plantations with good labor practices. I haven't looked more deeply into that, so I still have to do some more research on that end. But I do know that without fail, Harney's teas are always top notch. Freshest, best flavor. And obviously if it's a pu'er tea, you don't want fresh, you want it to be super aged, but I'm not talking pu'er teas. I'm talking green teas and regular black teas and white teas, right? Best leaves that are whole, even in the bag, right? Harney's teas, very good quality. And yes, you're going to pay a little bit more than you would, going to pay a lot more maybe than you would for Lipton tea, but Lipton tea is garbage. No one should drink that stuff. No judgment, but judgment. So yeah, Harney's teas, can highly recommend them. We just recently finished our last batch of Harney's tea, and we actually bought like this. We got, I think, did we get it from Costco? It must have been Costco, right? That giant tub of Harney's tea that actually came in a beautiful tin. We buy so much tea, it's hard to keep track of it. But yeah, it actually came in this really nice tin, and it took us forever to work through it. Of course, I prefer loose leaf over the bag teas for a couple of reasons. One, sustainability. You know, the waste involved in consuming whole leaf tea is significantly less than the waste involved in teas that are pre-bagged. But Harney's teas, some Harney's teas come in actually cloth sachets, which are biodegradable and also don't contribute to the microplastics in the environment or in your body. So there's at least that. But yeah, I definitely prefer whole leaf teas for the sustainability aspect, but also because sometimes the bags are actually overfilled. And so you don't get good flow through of the water when you're steeping the tea. So for that reason, I also prefer loose leaf teas. And in fact, I'll show you my little tea setup. This is my steeping pot because Brian actually made this pot. He made this little pot. Isn't that adorable? Isn't that great? Yeah, he made this in one of our Korean ceramics classes. And it actually works. It doesn't leak, but it does not have built into it a tea filter, which the Korean pots do. Asian pots do. They have basically built into the part of the actual ceramic is basically a tea sieve. So we don't have that. So we have a two-part system. So we actually have this tea sieve from a single cup steeper that we have, a single cup tea set we have, and I put it in this little pourer, which should actually be used for putting the hot water in, and then the hot water should get added to the teapot, but the teapot doesn't have a sieve built into it. So I let it sit here and steep, and then we pour it into the teapot, and then I pour it from there into my cup. Another sip of my tea. So this is a green tea that is part of the Royal Project in Thailand. So these are tea plantations owned and operated by the royal family and or supported by the royal family as part of the royal family's attempts to grow their economy based on sustainable farming instead of opium fields. So about 100 years ago, a lot of farmers in Thailand made their living growing opium. And the king at the time actually went to northern Thailand where these plantations were, and he talked to the people there. And he said, look, I need you to stop growing opium. It's terrible. It's really destructive. And we don't want to be associated with the opium industry. And the farmers said, well, okay, but what are we going to grow instead? But he actually responded the right way. He said, let me help you. I'm going to help you, set you up with coffee plantations, right? And coffee grows really well in the Thai highlands. And it's easy to grow amongst the trees, right? So they were able to reforest, was also a question of the deforestation of the Thai highlands. So they were able to reforest thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres. And instead of growing opium, the peoples up there, so the tribal peoples, the hill peoples, the Bangkokers call them, they started growing coffee instead. And so now they're growing coffee, and some of them are growing tea. So they're growing these crops that are much less destructive. Tea obviously can't grow in the forest. The coffee plants actually grow in the shade of trees, so that works out well. For tea plantations, you just have to have big fields of tea bushes, but the tea bushes are perennials, so you're not constantly churning up the soil and creating erosion and that sort of thing. So as far as I understand it, the tea bushes are actually good for the environment. They're not destructive to the environment the way that opium was. So yeah, but that's part of the Royal Project. And so now when you go to Bangkok International Airport, when you come out of the train station, it's very clever. When you come out of the air rail link, the air train station that comes into the basement of Suvarnabhumi Airport, one of the first things you see is this big shop that says Royal Project, Thai Royal Project. And they're selling all kinds of items that are supported by this Royal Project, locally made, handcrafted, locally grown, sustainably grown. So you can buy tea from these Thai tea plantations. I bought this fantastic bag that's hand woven by, could you bring this satchel, handsome? I brought this fantastic hand woven satchel, or satchel made from hand woven fabric in the traditional fashion. It looks like a pilgrim script, except with Thai nuances of Thai culture, for those of you who know what a pilgrim script is. And so, at this, you can buy creams, all kinds of like skin creams. You can buy dried fruit. You can buy fresh produce. And the nice thing about the Royal Project fresh produce is it's all organic and sustainably grown. So it's not going to be tourists who are going to buy the fresh produce. The fresh produce part of this shop is aimed at airport employees. So the airport employees have a place where they can go right after work before they get on the train and go home. They can go and buy all this amazing, affordable, organically grown fresh produce. And so it's a really neat project. I'm really appreciative of this whole concept. Now, the current king of Thailand is an asshole, and probably has nothing really to do with this project. This has been in existence longer than he's been on the throne. He hates Thailand. He hates the Thai people. He derides Thai culture. He actually was living in Germany, and he got kicked out of Germany because he refused to pay a 25 million euro fine for something one of his planes did on, I forget what it was, some kind of violation of German environmental code or something like that. Where is it? I don't know where the big satchel is. Is it hanging on a chair or something somewhere? Anyway, so the Thai Royal Project is not his initiative. It was an initiative that predates him, but it's happily still ongoing because there are other members of the royal family than just him. Yeah, so that's we tend to like to support such initiatives.
It's trying to figure out how to get the product.
Oh, it was right here all along. So this is the satchel that I bought from the Thai Royal Project. So it's meant to be worn crossbody, so like this, right? And it's got this really soft, flexible fabric. The whole fabric is like this, but because that's the strap, it actually like molds to my body. So even if I put a lot in here and it's heavy, it sits comfortably. It distributes nicely across the curve of my shoulder, right? It doesn't just pull down like a nylon strap would. And you can see there's just these lovely details, like it's all hand finished, and it's got this nice embroidery, little tassels. And it's basically made from 3 lengths of fabric like this. Each strap is a full width of fabric, which woven on a loom like this, probably a waist loom, I'm going to assume, because I've actually been to some of these villages and seen them weaving on waist looms, and dyed with natural dye stuffs. Really lovely. So this is my new project satchel. So when I go out and about now and I want to bring my sewing projects with me, they go in this satchel. So I keep that separate from my practical stuff satchel, which has like wallet and cell phone and that kind of stuff in it. And this cost an embarrassingly little amount of money. It was 225 baht, which is like $8. $8. This cost $8. Like I said, an embarrassingly little amount of money. So yeah, those are the kinds of things we like to buy when we go out. Souvenirs that are handmade and that are practical. Not going to sit on a shelf and collect dust somewhere. Okay, question. I need to make a pilgrim script for the Camino. Yeah, I need to make a medieval pilgrim script. I mean, this actually looks basically like a medieval pilgrim script in almost every way. But yeah, I'll be making one that's more appropriate for our pilgrimage. My grandmother had a similar satchel with birds pecking grain embroidered on it. It ripped several times, but she just stitched it back together each time. 100%, baby. I'm all about the repairs. I mean, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm re-hemming the edge of my kamicha. I am a big proponent of repair, repair, repair. Don't just constantly buy new things. If it can be fixed, please fix it. When we were in Thailand, we actually took our shoes, took 2 pairs of my shoes to be repaired. One of them had to have an entirely new sole put on both shoes. They were Clarks. The soles were out way before they should have. Seriously, Clarks, very disappointed with you on that score, but the uppers were in perfect condition. So I was definitely not going to throw those away. Took them to a shoe repair gentleman in Chiang Mai, who also repairs suitcases, by the way, and he put a fantastic new sole on both of them, which was not an easy process because he had to shave off the old one because of the style of sole it was. And it cost for both pairs of shoes, it was 600 baht, which is like $18 US. And I know by Thai standards, that's a lot of money, but you know, for us foreigners, I was happy to pay that. Oh, Rosario, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate your support. Yeah, but I'm a big proponent of fix things. Don't just constantly buy new things. Of course, unfortunately, in the modern world, a lot of items are built to deteriorate, right? They're actually built to break down so that we have to buy new things. Built-in obsolescence, whether it's machinery or our clothing or our shoes, they are not designed to last the same way. And unfortunately, it's the cost of being poor. Items that are more expensive generally tend to be better made. They tend to be made of higher quality materials. They therefore last longer. Fabrics, for instance. There's an Etsy seller selling a really high quality linen that is woven in Belgium, I think, Belgium or France. And it's expensive. I mean, relatively speaking, it's like $30 a meter or 30 euros a meter. I don't remember what the currency was, but somewhere around there, right? And that is expensive. I will not contend that, but I will guarantee you that that linen will last longer than the cheapo linen that you get for $6 or $7 a yard from fabrics.com, for instance, right? So that means that someone who has more money can invest more money in the initial outlay on the fabric. That fabric will then last longer. So if you're making historical garments out of that fabric, the garment will last longer. So the work that you put into it will therefore also last longer. But people who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, they can't afford that. They can't afford $30 a yard linen. So they're going to have to go for the cheaper linen, which means the linen itself will just wear out more quickly. And so the work that that person has put into that garment will be rendered null and void sooner than otherwise. The cost of being poor, it's awful. It's awful. It's awful. I have this adorable little dress. I call it my travel dress. And if you've seen my travel channel, you have seen this dress. It's a black, red, and white floral print dress that looks like it's like kind of out of the 50s, right? I usually wear it with a dogori or some other top over top of it, some little jacket of some kind. I bought that from White House Black Market in 2010. It was, at the time, the most expensive dress I'd ever bought myself with my money. I paid $130 for it. It wasn't on sale. And it was really hard for me to buy something that wasn't on sale. But it was, not only did it fit me really well and look very good on me, it was very well made. I am still wearing that dress to this day. That dress has hundreds of thousands of miles, I'm not exaggerating, under its belt. It is just now starting to wear out. The fabric is starting to wear out under the arms, just now. So 16 years of Contessa wear and tear. That $130, I've gotten my $130 worth out of that gown a dozen times over. But someone who doesn't have $130 that they can devote to one single dress wouldn't be able to do that. They would buy a dress for $30 made out of way lower quality materials, made with less care in the stitching and the finishing. It's going to wear out in a year, and then they'll have to buy another one and another one and another one, right? The cost of being poor is awful. It really is. So yeah. Is anyone else working on anything? Working on anything this evening? Back to the topic of dental care. One of the, other than using these abrasive pastes that we talked about for which we actually have numerous recipes, all of which contain something alarming in them. One of the recipes I found was just ash, was basically burn certain materials until it turns into ash, and then take the ash and then use that to scrub your teeth. That would taste so awful. Some of the more interesting concoctions contain sugar or honey, which would certainly make it taste good, but might not make it really great for your teeth. I wanted to look into, though, the antimicrobial properties of honey and see if honey interacts with the microfauna, microflora, and microfauna both, I guess, the microflora of one's mouth, in the same way that, say, sugarcane, refined sugar would, or if there aren't maybe some antimicrobial properties from the honey that would actually prevent it from actually leading to tooth decay the same way a concoction or a compote with sugar would. I haven't gotten a chance to look into that, but there's a lot of concoctions that contain honey as a way to sweeten it and make it more palatable, right? But even still, the same concoctions usually involve salt as an abrasive, or cuttlebone, or pumice stone. I mean, pumice stone. Jesus, ground pumice stone. Yeah, you're going to get your teeth white and there's going to be no enamel left on them. They are going to be so sensitive. But another thing that is recommended is actually just taking a rough linen cloth and using just the rough linen cloth to scrub your teeth. And I could see that actually being very beneficial, right? Because the rough linen is not really that rough, but it's got enough texture that it will probably help remove a lot of the, the soft mucus that will become plaque later on. And it also talks, this one's a little disturbing. It talks about rubbing your gums until they bleed, to stimulate the blood flow, right? And actually rubbing your gums, I have read, might in fact actually help with oral hygiene, because it does stimulate the blood flow. Rubbing them until they bleed is maybe too much, but the reason medieval people would have thought that was a good thing is because bloodletting was actually part of the balancing of your humors. And so rubbing your gums until they bleed would be like basically getting a microphlebotomy. It's like it's like going and getting a facelift in the modern world. That is basically what rubbing your gums until they bleed would accomplish. Oh, just ouch. Let me see. I'm trying to use Rudolphine tables and slide rules commonly used before handheld computers. Really interesting how a humble logarithm and making arithmetic less menial saved science. Yeah, yeah. I wish that actually students were still trained how to use a slide ruler to do things like those calculations. I really do. I wish that we were still trained how to do the low-tech version of all the science and all the arts, so that we don't lose sight, we don't lose those skills. I think it's really important that we still learn how to do that. Yes, we have computers who can do it now, but those computers won't necessarily always be there. They won't always work. We won't always have access to them. We won't always have access to the internet, she says, ironically, as she's using the internet to reach a hopefully large audience. But the point is that you won't necessarily always be able to look things up on Google or Grok or ChatGPT, right? Or Alexa even, right? Sometimes you will actually just have to remember things and know things using the original computer, our brains. I think it's really dangerous that we are literally offshoring our brain capacity to external devices. That's real. I mean, I know that Plato said that writing would be the death of thinking, right? He thought writing was going to mean that people would no longer have to memorize anything at all. And so people would lose the ability to actually draw on their own body of knowledge. And that did happen a little bit, but not entirely. But now we've got a situation where no one is bothering to remember even phone numbers. When I was growing up, I said this before, I'll say it again. I had at least 25 different phone numbers memorized, at least. And many of them, I haven't dialed those numbers in 35 years. And I can still remember those numbers and I could still dial them to this day. So it's yeah, I think we need to start relying more on our brains for things. I think we should go back to actually memorizing things, like seriously memorizing it, not just long enough to take the test and then flush. I mean, like actually memorizing it. I can still recite Hamlet's entire his entire third act soliloquy, right? To be or not to be, that piece of existential dread. I can recite that in its entirety, and I haven't performed any Shakespeare since high school, but I memorized it back then for a performance, and I can still remember it because I remembered it for more than just a flush and go experience. So yeah, I wish we would go back to teaching and learning the low-tech way of doing everything in addition to the high-tech way, so that we're prepared just in case. I have several pairs of boots that are nearly 4 times older than your little black dress. Purchase quality will give you good service. Yep, 100%. I have shoes that we just keep repairing and repairing and repairing. We got 2 pairs of shoes from Venice, from a shoemaker in Venice in 2018. And I have also worn the hell out of those shoes, both sets. And we just keep getting them repaired. The uppers are doing really, really well. It's basically just the soles that are in need of somewhat regular repair, because I walk the hell out of my shoes. I dance the hell out of my shoes. My shoes, it is hard to be a Contessa shoe. I don't envy their lives. My shoes have hard lives. I am not sedentary, and I am not just not sedentary, I am vigorously not sedentary. Therefore, my shoes bear the brunt of that experience. Yep, 100%. It's the cost of being poor. Poor people can't afford to spend $200 on a good pair of shoes that will then last 20 or 30 years, right? So they can afford the $20 or $30 pair of shoes that will fall apart before the year's end. Yeah, there's so much we could learn from medieval practices, consuming less but higher quality items, trying to find a use for everything until it disintegrates and just goes back to being one with the environment, more or less. Yeah, so much. But we won't, as the majority of people, alas. So yeah, in summation about the dental care, situation, medieval people had a wide array of methods of cleaning their teeth and their mouths, of keeping their breath fresh, of keeping their teeth white. It was not necessarily the best methods, but they had them and they applied them vigorously. But there's a lot of people I know now whose oral hygiene routine is pretty terrible. So I think we assume, there's a tendency to assume that we are the pinnacle of human civilization in any given era. The people living in that moment say we are the pinnacle of human civilization, and that's just not true. Civilization does not develop it's not a linear function. It's a trigonometric function. It's cosine, right? It goes in cycles. So we actually are not necessarily better than we've ever been. I think right now we're somewhere in the middle, all things considered, in Western civilization in particular. We're kind of in the middle, and it depends on what you're talking about. Are you talking about health outcomes? Well, if you can afford good treatment, then yeah, we probably have some of the best health outcomes now than we've ever had. God knows, for surgery, we definitely have the best health outcomes we've ever had, but that's mostly down to germ theory. That is mostly down to germ theory. There was a time when surgery would have been a 50-50 death sentence. But we're thankfully mostly past that. But there are other aspects of civilization that I think have taken a significant downturn. I think the one exception to the "we are now living in the best time" statement is Petrarca and some other Italian Renaissance philosophers and or writers, because Petrarch, he openly said he lived through the Black Death, and after watching all of his friends and family die, or most of them die, including the love of his life, Laura, he openly says, yeah, we're living in an era of shadow and ash. This is terrible. The Romans had it so much better. We need to go back to the golden era of the Pax Romana. We need to do whatever it was that they did to achieve that, the Pax Romana. And of course, their understanding of the Pax Romana was relative to their own experience, which was, you know, Italy in the 14th century was in a constant state of civil war. No matter where you were in Italy, any given city-state was a mess in the 14th century. Factions fighting with factions. You know, Romeo and Juliet, even though it takes place in the 16th century, reflects basically the 14th century state of most Italian city-states, which is families warring with each other, you know, that kind of struggling for power and dominance in a deadly way. That was 14th century Italy in most places. There's some exceptions there, but, you know, where Petrarca was, there was not an exception. So, you know, he actually just openly said, we're living in an era of shadow and ash. By the way, I think we're living in an era of shadow and ash right now. Metaphorically, at this point, we haven't yet gotten to actual ash floating through the air constantly, but I think we're going to go there if the wildfires keep up at the rates they've currently been maintaining. Let me see. Well, Butrin is going to wreck my teeth from dry mouth. Yeah, Cindy. Yeah. The dry mouth is a problem, right? Because if you actually suffer from dry mouth, that actually helps protect your teeth from bacteria. Yep. Let me see. I was listening to Robert Frost reading Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, and I thought I should start memorizing poems, right? Yeah, I need to get back to memorizing poems. It's good to have those little nuggets in your repertory to break out in a conversation and wow your listeners, right? But I think it's also just a thing of beauty. Medieval people used to be able to do that. Renaissance people, pre-modern people used to be able to do that. And I don't think just members of the upper crust. I'm pretty certain that even members on the lower end of society, you know, heard some of, especially the famous poems that were common knowledge, that they would memorize them also, and then they would be able to recite them to entertain each other. So yeah, I definitely think that we should go back to memorizing poems. I need to as well. I need to memorize some of Dante's poems. You know, there's actually, it feels like cheating to write poetry in Italian, because Italian is naturally such a lyrical language, and so many words just end in the same vowels and the same like vowel syllables anyway. So it makes it very easy to rhyme the end of your lines. The part where it gets tricky is maintaining the right rhythm, right? The right meter. That's where it gets a little harder for composing poetry in Italian. But yeah, I need to memorize some of Dante and Petrarch's poetry. And there's, you know, a bunch of other poets. I should memorize some of their poems in Italian, of course. There are actually a bunch of, you know, people always think of Middle English, they automatically think of Chaucer, but there's a whole plethora of contemporaries of Chaucer who at the time were as equally well known as he was, but have now, you know, like Shakespeare had a bunch of contemporaries who are equally as well known as he is, but most people haven't heard of Ben Jonson. I don't mean most people in my audience. I mean, most, if you ask the average English speaker who Ben Jonson was, they will have no clue. Or they'll think of the wrong Ben Jonson. But you know, there was Lydgate was one of Chaucer's contemporaries who composed poetry and also wrote short stories in Middle English, right? But most people haven't heard of him. Most people in my audience are more likely to have heard of him. So yeah, it's something I think we do need to get back to, memorizing poems. Let me see. Feuding families, eloped marriage, feuding families plus eloped marriage equals good literature. Yeah. Don't forget to like and subscribe, everyone. Double tap your screen if you're enjoying. I recently, speaking of feuding families plus eloped marriage equals good story, if you recall, in my most recent medieval story time, I read what we're now calling the proto Romeo and Juliet, the tale by Marie de France, Les Deux Amants, the two lovers. I've spun that off. I've clipped it out of the medieval story time. And for those of you who want to listen to just that story, I'm going to be uploading, or it's uploading as we speak. I'll be publishing that story in the course of the day. So this is a story by, well, documented by Marie de France. She claims that it was actually all of her stories she claims existed already. She's just putting them down on vellum for our enjoyment. But I'm pretty certain she's adding a lot of her own depth of storytelling to them, taking it from being just a basic folk tale to something with a whole lot more meaning and emotion and subtext. But that story is actually, you know, one of those cases of a marriage where the king was trying to fight it, and it results in the two lovers ultimately dying. Right. So it's not quite a feuding family, but it's a case of the father not wanting his daughter to actually leave him. And she really wants to leave him and go, you know, make a life with this handsome young knight. And her father does everything to prevent them from happening, and ultimately it results in their death. So definitely a popular concept throughout history. And Italy was full of feuding families. And I was just reading, in preparation for our next medieval story time last night, I was reading more of the pardon letters from the Duke of Burgundy. And some of these pardon letters they're a little hard to read, because pardon letters invariably include the details of the crime. And some of these crimes are very disturbing. There's a whole group of pardon letters that are focused entirely around kidnappings, abductions, against abduction marriages, abduction weddings, where a woman is kidnapped and either for an elopement, in which case it's voluntary, well, kidnapped. Either she's abducted as part of a mutually agreed upon elopement, or she's abducted and forced to marry simply because she's a rich widow. There's a whole bunch of rich widows in the Duchy of Burgundy in the 15th century who are getting abducted for the husband, the groom, to then get access to their wealth. The nice thing about these pardon letters is it shows that a lot of them were being punished for it, and they were ending up getting banished from the duchy, basically from their home, their natal cities. And so they actually have to ask for a pardon in order to be able to come back. So it's nice to see that they were punished for it. It's not super nice that, you know, they then basically are allowed to come home again eventually. On the positive side, the woman isn't forced to stay in the forced marriage, and she actually, in some cases, they countersue. The widows countersue. Once they get away from the man, they countersue. And that's what leads to them being banished from the property, from their natal lands. It's also what forces them, as part of the pardon, they have to pay a large chunk of money to the Duke to be allowed back into the duchy. But yeah, I'll be picking out one of the least traumatizing, the least triggering ones of those pardon letters to share, because it is an interesting look into day-to-day life for, these are actually middle-class people in some cases. We're not talking, you know, a knight kidnapping a noble woman, although that does happen in one case. I'm talking just a rich widow. She was, you know, a merchant's wife. The merchant died. She was 60 years old. She was 60 years old. So she was absolutely not being abducted for her youthful beauty, right? It was 100% her wealth to which this man wanted access. But she gets it back. She eventually she escapes, and she brings the authorities. They get arrested. They get tortured. They spend like 9 months in prison, and then they're banished. And then eventually they want to come back. So they, you know, basically request a pardon from the Duke, but the Duke says, sure, no problem. Just give me a whole lot of money. And they do. But it's kind of surprising how often that a trope that often makes its appearance in modern historical romances. Yeah, that was a real thing that actually happened in the Middle Ages, not made up by modern authors at all. Now, the part about it being consensual, or resulting in a happy ending. No, that doesn't seem to happen. This doesn't seem to happen that the woman falls in love with her kidnapper and then they live happily ever after. No. Often the woman brings charges against him, he gets banished, or he gets sentenced to death and he has to request a pardon. That seems to be the more common outcome. But one of the things about these letters of pardon, in the case of the abductions, because the letters of pardon are very often just very objective. They don't get into the emotions around the abduction. And in many cases, the person bringing the charge is the woman's family members, not her. We don't necessarily have her voice. She's not necessarily deposed. So we don't know necessarily if she was a willing participant in this elopement or if it was really and truly an abduction and a forced marriage. In some cases, it's obvious because she is deposed and she states, no, this asshole kidnapped me, off with his head. In other cases, it seems more like they were basically planning and plotting so that she could run off and get remarried without her family interfering. Yes. Yes, please. You need to. Oh, yeah.
And say thank you to Nicole.
Nicole, thank you. Super chat.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate that gift. Very generous.
And they won't be able to see any of the products we tagged.
Oh, okay.
I think we have to do it at least 30 minutes beforehand.
Okay. Well, they'll be up there next time.
And maybe after it posts, they can go back and look. Maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
There you go.
So yeah, it's very interesting to read these pardon letters because it does offer this window into daily life in the specific case, in the cities in the Duchy of Burgundy in the 15th century. And it addresses aspects of life that don't often get included in the Great Chronicles, or they don't get included in the letters or correspondence, or the correspondence doesn't survive, but the pardon letters do. So this has been a really great a great source of information for helping me flesh out my understanding of daily life in the 15th century, specifically in the Low Countries, in Flanders and what's now kind of northern France, and in what's also now parts of the Netherlands, also Luxembourg, because it was part of the Duchy of Burgundy at this point. Yeah, very, very interesting, very illuminating source of information. I also just found this other new resource that's really fascinating for 14th century business operations in Italy, La Pratica della Mercatura. I mentioned this yesterday, or the day before that, it's this tome of information put together by a 14th century merchant. Basically, it's the guidebook to how to be the most successful merchant you can be in 14th century Italy. He provides all of these conversion tables of weights and measures from Florence to other parts of Italy and other parts of Europe. He provides lists of the kinds of goods that are traded and sold and bought. He provides information about religious houses in various parts of Europe. It is such a detailed source of information. I've managed to find a PDF of the transcribed Italian, but it is not translated, it's transcribed. So if Italian is not your language, it might be a little trickier to dig through. But I've already, I was just glancing through and I found a reference to a whole bunch of items that he has sold himself. And one of the ones that really stuck out was dragon's blood. The words dragon's blood, which I know it's not really dragon's blood. It could be a concoction, some kind of medicinal concoction that's been imported from the East. It could be a common term for some kind of plant. There's a lot of things it could be, but still, dragon's blood did stick out to me. That was pretty interesting. I can't hear you because a cat stepped on my phone and closed the sound. I'm sorry, Cindy. Cats are the worst and the best at the same time. In Tamil Nadu, there is something similar known as Talai Kustal, where elderly family members are drowned so their pension can be collected, or because they are a financial burden. Oh, that is hard. That is hard on you. Wow, that is really hard. There's cases of that happening in the US, right? There's cases of family members making deals with hospice care or with long-term care and just letting their wealthy loved one or the loved one who has things that can be inherited just die. Two friends of mine have had this happen, and there was nothing they could do about it. And in this case, in both cases, it was what we would call a black widow. It was a wife, not their mother, but like the second or third wife of their father, who wanted his money and didn't want the children to inherit anything. And so she made a deal with the director of this hospice care that denied them access to their father. And they basically just stopped giving him food and water and just let him die a slow, painful death. Right. Yeah, we have that too in the US. It's pretty gruesome. If you look it up, you're going to find cases of it. They tried to get they tried to get the media involved, and the response from the media was, this is so common, it won't be interesting enough to actually get people to watch. It's not clickbaity enough, basically. It wasn't newsworthy enough. This was back in 2013. So yeah, it's a thing that happens in the US too. It's pretty gruesome. They don't literally drown them, but they just kind of let them die from neglect. Although in some cases I've read they were actually administered overdoses of morphine. And that's one of the things, that's one of the phenomena that actually does make me hesitant about legalizing euthanasia. Not because I'm not concerned about people who actually are of sound mind and body, who can make that decision in a reasoned fashion. I'm concerned about that getting bent by these greedy family members to then use it as a way to dispose of their loved one and take their inheritance or their assets, basically to kill them off. That's kind of where I'm concerned about legalized euthanasia being an issue. And I know this live stream just took a far left turn. I apologize for that. It's not the beautiful medieval stuff that I usually talk about, but that's just kind of where the stream has taken us today. Oh my goodness, yeah. Is anyone working on anything? Is anyone sewing or crafting on anything in particular? Twitchy, what are you currently working on? Are you working on repairs, or are you working on your next embroidery, or is your embroidery finished yet? Yeah, inheritance in the Middle Ages is very strictly regulated. A lot of people have this bizarre view of the Middle Ages in Europe as being in a time of a lawless time with no regulation. But almost all polities in medieval Europe were highly regulated for most of the Middle Ages. There's a brief period where the Justinian plague is wreaking havoc for about 150 years, from the 560s to the 720s. Where things get a little less regulated, and there's a lot less, there's a reduced capacity to actually administer the law and apply the law. The laws are still there. There's just, people are too busy dying regularly for it to be enforced with any kind of regularity. But otherwise, most of medieval Europe the various polities that make up medieval Europe, they've got regulations, they've got laws, and there's enforcement mechanisms, and they're enforced. It might not necessarily be the same way that things are enforced now, but it was. And so, inheritance is one of those things that's very strictly regulated. We have lots of wills that have survived from across medieval Europe. Surprising number of them, in fact, considering how often things just catch on fire and burn to the ground. Thank you, French Revolution. Thank you, 30 Years' War. Thank you, Peasants' Revolt in Germany. But even despite all of those times that things just get burnt to the ground, we have a large number of documents that have survived. And wills are some of the most interesting documents for those of us who want to understand how people lived their daily lives in the past. Because people, even on the bottom level of society, if they had any assets at all, they left a will. Even if it was just to say that their cow and their collection of buckets should be left to their daughter. And I'm not making that up. That is a will from Dublin in the 1470s, right? Even just a few items that gets recorded. Also, wills also include instructions for how their body should be treated once they've died, where they should be buried, if people should say prayers for them, that kind of thing. But these wills nearly always go into detail about bequests. And so they talk about these various garments, about kitchen equipment that should be passed on to certain people. It's not like it is now where we have so much stuff, where we own so many things that we don't itemize most of the things. We only itemize the high value items. No, in the medieval world, every item was a high value item, or almost every item was a high value item. We have wills from 14th century Italy that detail the bequest of underpants. And this is one of those pieces of evidence that I have about women wearing underpants in the Middle Ages. By underpants, I mean panties, underwear, the thing that you wear around your loins and between your legs, right? So there is this will from a 14th century monk in Bologna, or in around the Bologna area. That's where the will is lodged. He bequeaths his breeches, his brays, his mutande to his niece. His used ones, not a new pair, the ones that he had. So there is no reason, I can't think of a single reason why he would bequeath a used pair of breeches to his niece if it isn't for her to use them. Breeches are one of those garments that you're probably not going to upcycle into a kerchief, for instance. Right. But even just, and that's like all he has. He doesn't have very much. He's got some money. He bequeaths her some money as well, but he bequeaths her this small sum of money that he has, and his breeches, his mudande, his underpants, right? She's got a son. I went and checked it out. She had a son. He didn't bequeath them to the son. He bequeathed them to her, right? So to me, that is evidence of women owning and wearing breeches in the Middle Ages. There's also, on the subject of women wearing underpants, medieval European women wearing underpants, there are several different references to nuns wearing underpants, breeches, bre, mudande, greca, right? Again, you know, if women didn't wear them, the nuns wouldn't be wearing them either, but they were. So yeah, this whole argument about women never wore underpants in the Middle Ages, or it was just so rare that it was exceptional, I don't buy it. Depending on where you are and what your status was in life, and maybe your own personal preference as a woman, yeah, there's evidence all across the Middle Ages in various places that women were sometimes at least wore breeches or underpants. Yeah, and I know some of you are going, wait, that's a debate? Yeah, that's a debate. That's a hot debate in the medieval living history world. There are people who will die on the hill of women never wore underpants. I say I have evidence of them having done it in certain times and places. Is that evidence that they always did it? No, but even not all modern women wear underpants in the West. Some women don't like it and they don't do it, and that's fine. I'm confident there were medieval women who felt the same. Okay, let's see what that triggered. Kind of reminds me of a Marathi film where a man bequeaths his bicycle to his grandson. Yeah. Dragon's blood likely refers to dragon's blood resin, which is a very popular incense and pigment in monastic settings. Ah, twitchy. Yes, that is exactly what it is. You know why? Because in that same paragraph, they also mention a couple of other resins and gums. Mastic gum is mentioned, gum arabic is mentioned, myrrh is mentioned, frankincense is mentioned. So that would absolutely make sense. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. But still, the dragon's blood made me, look, because those words, they're so dramatic. And in Italian, it's sangue de dragone, right? In the 14th century dialect, sangue de dragone. So it's just got this poetry about it, right? Still chiseling mortise and tenons for the bed. Oh, Takeda, good for you, man. Hey, dude, if you don't mind, if you would like to get like a little short video of you doing the chiseling and send it to me, I'd be happy to post that and share that if you don't mind, because I don't do hand worked wood. I don't work with wood generally at all. So I think that would be a cool thing to share with everyone. If you're interested, let me know. Dragons popular is an extremely, yeah, that would, yeah, there it is. Okay. What about their menstrual cycles to catch the blood? Lynette, that's a great question. So there's some pretty disturbing theories out there about what women did for their menstrual cycle in the pre-modern world in the Middle Ages. I have actually heard some people, and hear me out on this, who claim that they free bled. right? That they just bled into and that's why they wore a linen camicia like this. The camicia just caught the blood. No, just absolutely not. Anyone who claims that cannot have done it in any kind of experimental context, right? There's just not a shot, not a chance of that. So I don't believe that. Some people say, well, only during their menstrual cycles, they wore a clout, which is basically they put a string around their waist and they ran this string between their legs and they attached a piece of fabric to that. But they only did that during their menstrual cycles. Okay, maybe, but if you do that plus a pair of breeches, that's going to protect your garments a lot more from blood stains. But also menstrual blood that ends up on your thighs and dries, no, not comfortable at all. Just ew, 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 ew. So there is actually in Greenland, some of you may not know, there was a Norse settlement in Greenland starting in the 10th century and running until about the 15th century. They have excavated a bunch of the graves there. They had to because erosion was actually exposing the graves. They didn't have to dig them up. They didn't have to dig very far. And one of the bodies they found was a woman, and there was a string around her waist, and there was a string between her legs, and there was a piece of moss attached to the string. Moss would be an amazing menstrual pad. Moss is antimicrobial. It's very durable. It's sponge-like. It's very absorbent. And you can actually try it. Go get a piece of really nice moss, like, the thick kind, pull it off of the stone, rinse it, and put water in it and see how much water it absorbs, and then squeeze it out and see just how durable it is. Moss is super durable. And so this would make a great, very cheap, accessible, basically menstrual pad, but only in places where moss grows. If you are living in a dry climate, that kind of moss is not going to grow. You need specific conditions for that kind of moss. So that's obviously a more local solution, but that is something that at least for certain in Greenland in the 14th or 15th century, they were doing that. And it would make sense that it's something that could be done in other places. I've also read about rags, menstrual rags, clouts, basically, linen, made of linen or hemp, invariably, things that can be washed out. They actually appear sometimes in inventories and expense accounts. And they appear in kind of an interesting oblique way. They might be called women's rags, something like that, right? Or they're not labeled at all. It's just referred to as a little chest filled with white linen rags, and you're like, yeah, we know what that's for. if it's found, if it's inventoried as being in the ladies' chamber, for instance. Yep. Let me see. Oh goodness, we're getting some comments coming through here late. Can the widow be charged with murder or conspiracy to commit murder? Oh, you're talking about in the case of Black Widow? No, 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 they cannot, because they cleverly do it in such a way that there is enough evidence for that. And she can just claim that she was just abiding by his wishes to die peacefully without medical intervention. Conveniently, the father had lost consciousness at that point and couldn't argue against it. Yeah. Nope, cannot. Poor quality wool is also useful. Yeah, wool would be, again, it's antimicrobial and absorbent. May or may not be comfy depending on the wool.
Did you say thank you to Terrascano?
No, who?
Terrascano?
Terrascano?
They just gave you
stuff. Thank you. So everyone, I am so sorry if I'm not showing my gratitude for all of these who have left super chats and gifts and everything. For whatever reason, they are not showing up to me. My condottiero can see them out there, but I, who should be able to see them and then thank you for them, I don't get to see it. I'm sorry. Thank you. I appreciate all the ways in which you all are supporting me in sharing my knowledge of medieval material culture, in doing more research into material culture, and hopefully inspiring you all. Yeah. So yeah, there's, depending on where you were and when you were exactly in the Middle Ages, how you handled a menstrual cycle would vary. But I have lots of evidence of women doing something about it that didn't involve free bleeding into their smock. For women, especially with a heavy menstrual cycle, and I know this is going to drive some of you away, but that's okay. You men folk, you need to learn about this anyway. When you have a heavy menstrual flow and you are not able to do anything, what the hell, not able to do, you just let it flow. This linen is not going to, your linen smock is not going to be enough to absorb that. It's going to bleed through into your overgarment, and then your overgarment is going to have blood stains. And I'm confident that it is no accident that one of the most common stain treatments in the medieval manuals that detailed stain treatments is blood. But I don't think it's just for women. I think it's for men too, because men are always doing things to bleed on themselves. They're getting into fights all the time. Men at arms, even when they're training, there's accidents that happen. Armor can pinch, right? So, but that being said, I don't think that's a sign that women were just free bleeding as a matter of course. No, I completely refute that. You say that moss and wool were known to be antimicrobial. Did they test several materials to see which doesn't cause an infection? So let me be clear. Moss and wool were not known to be antimicrobial. They are known. I know you probably don't mean it this way, but I want to be clear. Germ theory is not a thing in the Middle Ages. Medieval people understood very well cause and effect. They understood that if they did X, then it had a good or not good outcome. And so they would either do it more or do it less. So they didn't necessarily understand about the antimicrobial nature of moss and or wool. Those happen to be properties that would result in good outcomes and therefore lead medieval people to use them more often. I have not seen any studies about using wool or moss specifically for menstrual pads and which ones would be more or less likely to cause infection. I just know that studies have been done in general about the antimicrobial effects overall about moss and wool. Yeah, but not specifically in the context of menstruation. Yeah. Oh, UKR, thank you. Love that compliment. Oh, let me see. Why is it doing that? I hate it when it does that. No, why are you like this? Sorry. Okay, truth, I wind up bleeding fairly regularly with things I hurt myself with. Yep, bloodshed was hell. I cut myself at least once a week and end up bleeding on something, right? Just while I'm sewing or cooking or a paper cut, sharp edge sticking out, my cats, right? Just like bleeding, it happens all the time, even in our civilized modern world. So, why wouldn't it therefore be a common issue in the medieval world? Yeah, but I don't think that means by any stretch of the imagination, do I think that means that people just free bled into their garments. I just don't think that. Yep. So yeah, my germ theory, not a thing in the Middle Ages, but they did understand cause and effect. And that's why we get practices, for instance, like the salt toothpaste, right? The toothpaste concoction that contains salt. Yes, it's an abrasive, but at least it dissolves relatively quickly in the presence of water, like your saliva, but it would definitely have been antimicrobial. So the outcome may have been that even though it may have led to the dissolution of your enamel, the antimicrobial effect of using a salt-based paste on a daily basis would be sufficient to retard cavity growth. So I just recently read a report, and it was a very scientific report on studying a specific cemetery, the 14th and 15th century bodies in the cemetery, specifically the periodontal situation, and investigating the prevalence of periodontal disease in the skeletons, well, specifically in the skulls, and comparing that to modern outcomes and the modern frequency. And what they found is that there was actually relatively low incidence of periodontal disease, despite the fact that there was a lot of wear and tear on the teeth, not cavities so much. I mean, there were cavities, just not as much as you might think, but a lot of the teeth were very worn down, which we discussed earlier on is a consequence of eating these bread that is stone ground, and, you know, that just literally wears the teeth down. And, you know, chewing, they chewed their food apparently a lot more because their food wasn't necessarily as soft as ours is. And so there was a lot more grinding down of the teeth, which actually may have contributed to there being less periodontal disease because there was no ability for cavities to actually form. But a salt-based dental paste may have actually, according to this report, helped retard the bacterial growth in the mouth, especially the deleterious bacteria, interestingly. There was another question someone popped up that I wanted to address the other day, other than the usual, now very tedious, everyone was dirty, everyone stank, everyone's breath was foul. Oh, there was the foul breath thing. So one of the many ways that medieval people could and did keep their breath from smelling foul, they would chew herbs. Right, they would actually chew a variety of herbs, including mint, which of course is still used very heavily in modern Western toothpastes. But they would also chew basil and rosemary and lavender, among a variety of other herbs. And so they really didn't want to have foul smelling. Oh, cloves also. And they also knew for tooth pain, they had clove oil, even though they didn't necessarily, or even just they knew that chewing on a clove would actually cause numbness and actually reduce the pain. So there were actually ways, medieval people definitely had methods of anesthesia. They had ways of reducing the pain that in some cases were pretty damned effective. They also had poppy juice, by the way, but that's going to render you not useful as a person, whereas, you know, topical application of clove oil or clove powder is going to be okay. You'll still be able to function as a human. So yeah, these were all ways that they used to keep their breath fresh, that they used to stave off tooth pain. Not the completely barbaric, amedical environment that people imagine in the Middle Ages. Let me see, Takeda says, I think salt sodium chloride specifically is like 4.5, 4.7 Mohs, and tooth enamel is 5 Mohs. Rough memory. So while it would not be super abrasive, it will wear over a long period of time. Yeah, there were definitely more. Yeah, I agree. Salt is not necessarily the most abrasive thing they could have used. Especially because they definitely used more abrasive things. Every time I think about grinding up pumice stone and putting it in a paste and using my finger to rub that paste onto my teeth, or even just a cloth to rub that paste onto my teeth, pumice stone. Whew, damn. This is where I remind everyone to please like, if you're enjoying this, double tap the screen and subscribe. Pumice stone, Jesus Christ. In the Salernitan, in the recipe for the toothpaste from Salerno, they actually specify red pumice, which is, you know, it's in a volcanic island. And I've been to Sicily and they do indeed have red pumice stone there. So next time I go to Sicily and I'm walking down the beach and I see red pumice stone, I'm going to be thinking about all of those medieval teeth that didn't have enamel. Oh, God. Oh, the things humans do to ourselves. But you know, it did what it was supposed to do, which was help keep the teeth white, which brings us back to the idea that it was very important for medieval teeth to be white. Let me see. Stevie Steverino says, I love the idea of living in earlier times like this. Yeah, so I love the idea as well. And I love selectively living an earlier lifestyle, by which I mean all the nice parts, all the pretty parts, all the salubrious parts, and none of the deleterious, insalubrious, and destructive parts. Which is what one of the beauties of living history is, that we practitioners of living history can indeed choose that. We can choose to only focus on the nice parts. We don't have to engage in phlebotomy, for instance, as part of our living history experience. What is phlebotomy, you might ask? Phlebotomy is bloodletting. And this is a practice across Eurasia for thousands of years. The idea that you needed to balance the humors by bringing your core bodily fluids into balance, one of which was your blood. And therefore you would actually, if you were suffering from an excess of blood, then, if you were too hot, for example, if you were too choleric, then, and if your disease was associated with suffering from cholera, then they would bleed you. They would cut a hole into your vein and they would let the blood out neatly into a bowl. Of course, they didn't just let it leak all over the place. But phlebotomy was a very, very highly trained profession for centuries and centuries and centuries. So that's not part of my medieval living history experience. No phlebotomy, thank you very much. I'm good. Also, I'm not going to experiment with most medical treatments, medieval medical treatments. The ones that are sort of superficial and don't out the gate involve toxic ingredients. Yeah, I could get into that. I could, just to see what happens. But I'm definitely not going to play around with any of the prescriptions that involve mercury or arsenic or lead or orpiment. Lots of them do. I'm not going to involve myself. I'm probably going to avoid, concoctions involving rue or pennyroyal. So yeah, there's that. Comment. Getting back to the previous doctor, the doctor can skip the leeches with me. I bleed enough while poking myself accidentally. I don't need to seek a doctor to keep your humor, your balances. So what Takeda, what I hear you saying is that you basically engage in a circular economy of lifestyle that allows you to keep your humors naturally balanced through the activities that you just naturally pursue. Got it. Yeah, it's funny. Leeches were used sometimes for bloodletting, but really often they did a phlebotomy where they would cut a hole in your vein and just let it flow. And unfortunately, if you were particularly sick, that was the time when they would particularly engage in bloodletting. And only the wealthy could usually engage in that level of bloodletting. It's another case of the rich doing much more harmful things to their bodies than the poor. So, your average peasant probably couldn't afford to have a professional phlebotomist come and perform a bloodletting. So maybe they would use leeches, which are not going to have the same horrifying effect that just poking a hole in your vein is going to, and letting the blood just flow out like a fountain of wine. So, this is particularly that kind of bloodletting was performed when someone was very sick. And unfortunately, bleeding them would probably lead to them getting to their condition worsening by weakening their immune system and weakening their body. So it is very interesting that people didn't seem to put two and two together about, normally medieval people were really clever about cause and effect observations, but no one seemed to put two and two together when it came to bloodletting. Letting someone's blood when they're sick makes them sicker and then they die. Like they didn't, somehow that series of observations just escaped them. So yeah, one of those cases where it was better to be poor than to be rich, and therefore to not have access to the latest and greatest in medical treatments. Poor people were also much less likely to have access to mercury treatments. Luckily for them. Oh God. I mean, I can absolutely see how humans would look at mercury. Just seriously, it seems like a miraculous material, the way mercury behaves. It definitely seems like the elixir of the gods. There has to be something super powerful about it. I understand that. But surely enough people dying from mercury treatments would eventually, someone would cotton on to that sooner than we did, rather, because it took us centuries. I think many physiologists at the time relied on the often inaccurate works of Galen, who never dissected a human body. Vesalius disproved many of his theories. Yeah, 100% unrude, 100% Galen. And the Arab physicians were also working from Galen. And a lot of Oriental medicine, actually, a lot of Galen's theories are reflected in Oriental medicine. In fact, the humors absolutely are. So yeah, absolutely. People were working from Galen, and some of Galen's teachings worked, and some of them definitely did not. Yeah, there's some problems there, but there's, all throughout the Middle Ages, there's the occasional physician who comes along and says, no, this is not good. We're not going to keep doing it this way. Unfortunately, Galen was a pretty powerful influence for far longer than he should have been. Yeah, 100%. Let me see. Yeah, I'll just leave that up there for now, and then I'll hide it, and then I have to do this, and I have to do that to get the stupid comments to show. Yeah. Okay, let me just see if I missed any things. Okay, yep. Right, so let's see, upcoming projects for me. I'm still working on my new 15th century Flemish gown, guna in 15th century English, or robe in 15th century French. This is the layer that would come over top of the kirtle. It is the layer that most people assume with the medieval princess look. The one where you have a big wide belt here, and it's got the long train and the fitted sleeves and the turn back collar, right? I'll be honest, I have made almost no progress on that, and I've been running up on a creative wall. There's just a lot of circumstances in our lives right now that aren't necessarily super happy. So I've, been suffering from a little bit of creative depression and a lack of energy to actually finish this damn dress. I'm also running up into the wall of, and I've got to get over myself on this, I'm running up against the wall of, I want to do it exactly as it should. I want to do it as accurately as possible. And I think to myself, well, today I might learn something that will negate what I thought I understood yesterday, and then the dress will no longer be as accurate as possible. So I should hold off just a little more for just the next bit of research. And at this point, I just need to freaking make it. I just need to get it done. I need to start cranking out more gowns for my medieval kit, because I've got this 2-week event coming up at the end of July, and July's coming quickly, folks. And I need to have a lot more clothes for it, because most of my clothes are just disintegrating at this point after having been worn for 25 years. I just need to do it. I just need to suck it up, and it won't be as 100% authentic as I would like it to be, but I just need to make some clothes at this point that look nice and fit me well. So I'm going to force myself to do that. I really am. And as I've said before, I'm going to have to be using the sewing machine to accomplish a lot of the long seams on that, because I don't have the time to do all the content creation that I do and all the research that I do, and also hand sew enough clothes to get it done in time for July and August. Also because I cook. And I do slow food, and I cook a lot of things from scratch because I want to minimize the processed garbage that I'm eating. So that also takes time. And I can't afford a maid to do the dishes and keep the house clean, and that also takes time. So yeah, I'm kind of my own worst enemy in this case. I just need to bloody well finish it. I've almost finished. I still have to do the top whip stitching. My new Not a Hennin, the pointed cone princess hat that many of you also associate with the quintessential medieval look, right? I have almost finished. I just have to do the top whip stitch, but I'm going to be making a very splendid cover to go over top. Right now it's just plain black silk, which is fine, but there are fancier versions that have been documented, and I would like to make a cover that can go over the plain base cone, and then I can make multiple covers, and then I can change them out based on the outfit I'm wearing. That's a conjectural approach to this. I have only kind of scant tangential evidence to indicate that as a potential practice. One of the scant tangential pieces of evidence is the fact that in the expense accounts of Margaret of Denmark, the Queen of Scotland, there are a couple of different entries for materials for a turret, but never ever only the soft materials. It's never the vellum or the actual support materials. So my theory is that she's actually having different covers made to go on top of this base. Right. And it makes more sense from a medieval perspective to not have a bunch of different cones that are then all different based on their coverings, that you have maybe one or two, like a tall one and a not tall one, and then you have different covers that can just be put on top of those depending on the day. That makes more sense to me from a medieval consumption perspective. Yeah. More and more I envy the Amish who keep life basic without the distraction of modern life. Well, do you know any Amish people, Stevie? Just out of curiosity, are you friends with any Amish people? Their lives are pretty hard because it's because they don't have a lot of the technology that we use in modern life, although they are increasing the amount of technology they have in their lives. They actually spend a lot more time working because they don't have leisure time because they have to do things more low tech than we do. So I think it's just different. It's different hard, right? There are different stressors. Now, which set of stressors is more salubrious, is more beneficial for humans, is more natural for the way we have evolved and our psychological constitution? Yeah, I would say that probably doing more slow life activities, low tech things done by hand at a more gentle pace is probably better for us. I think we are at our current ridiculously fast-paced lifestyle and the expectations we have to produce, to make, to create at the rates that we're expected to do it because of modern technology. I think we are absolutely stressing ourselves into anxiety attacks. On the other hand, all of those technological advances have saved billions of lives, literally. People who never would have made it to adulthood are now productive members of society, because without the advanced technological advances, we wouldn't have the medical science, like vaccines, that allowed them to survive. We wouldn't have the surgeries. We wouldn't have the machinery that has allowed for sanitation, right? In the kinds of cities that we have, that therefore reduce the incidence of cholera to almost nothing in the West. So it's almost, I don't know if there's a way to balance it, right? I don't know if there's a way to have both a slow lifestyle while not shedding all of the benefits of modern technology, right? I don't know if that's possible, is what I'm saying. Yeah, what do you think? Is it possible? Can we find a balance? Or are we doomed to either choose a style of life where infant mortality is crazy high or where infant mortality is really low, but we're stressed beyond belief? Yeah. Trust me, the Amish aren't to be envied. There's so many issues in there, like incest, abuse, death from lack of medical care. Yeah, Villa Vendetta. I came from Amish country, so I know what you mean. Yep. Yeah, need to make a new coat for my nun kit as I want to have something that is closer to what my research tells me about what they would have worn. Yeah, more completely natural material. Yeah, natural fibers for the win, baby. I've said it before. I'll say it again. In living history, I believe that everyone should be able to choose their own level of authenticity. People should be allowed to grow at their own pace, and there should be no judgment about that. We as living historians, when asked questions, should ideally know what would have been done, what would have been more accurate or authentic, but that doesn't mean we have to necessarily implement that on our bodies. And you should be allowed to grow and discover and learn as we go. Natural fibers have benefits that go beyond authenticity, though, as Twitchy well knows. So I'm not preaching at you, Twitchy. I'm putting this out there for everyone else. You know that. Natural fibers are one, flame retardant. Most of them will not, they will self-extinguish, right? And they won't leave horrible, super hot 3rd-degree burns on your body. They burn at a much lower temperature than petrochemicals like polyester do, right? And they are much less likely to spark and catch on fire than synthetic petrochemical fibers are. One of the reasons one of the big theories about so-called spontaneous combustion, which really saw its heyday at the second half of the 19th century, is that it was the rise of celluloid as a fiber, the first synthetic fiber of which I'm aware, which was a petrochemical, right? And celluloid was so flammable that the tiniest spark would set it up. It would set it on fire instantly, would go up like a torch, and it would burn so hot that it left a body that was better cremated than crematoria in the era could manage, right? So that's why you don't want synthetic fibers, especially if you engage in an activity that involves a lot of open flames. And especially one that involves you working with a fire frequently if you do any kind of medieval cooking, for instance. But also, natural fibers are antimicrobial. You will have much less body odor to no body odor as a consequence of wearing them. They breathe better, so you're not going to sweat as much. They're going to help regulate your body temperature. Also, just whether it's hot or cold, they're going to help keep you more homeostasis. They're going to help you maintain homeostasis. So there's a lot of, and also then the environmental impact, right? Natural fibers biodegrade. They go back to the earth. They're not toxic. They don't leave toxic substances everywhere. We can talk about the dye stuffs later. That's a different conversation. Synthetic fabrics, though, they're microplastics. They end up in the water. We then eat them. We then get inflammatory diseases. We develop cancer. We develop all kinds of syndromes. They're now finding in Greenland, in the most remote Arctic waters of Greenland, they are finding deposits in the water of brake dust and microfibers from polyester from synthetic clothing. They're finding all kinds of pollutants of civilization in the most remote waters of our planet, right? So this is not a local issue. This is not something where, well, I live in a place where we only use natural fibers. Doesn't matter. So using and wearing natural fibers is not just a matter of authenticity at all. It's a matter of personal safety. It's a matter of personal hygiene. It's a matter of personal comfort. It's a matter of taking care of our goddamned environment. And no, I'm not a tree hugger. Okay, I do hug trees. I love trees. I think trees are great. That's not my point. My point is that my environmentalism is selfishly motivated. I want clean air to breathe. I want a comfortable environment. I want weather patterns that are not erratic and extreme. I want healthy flora and fauna to create a beautiful environment around me, right? I want to avoid cancer caused by environmental industrial influences, right? It's all selfish. Environmentalism is completely selfish. Everyone should be an environmentalist because everyone should want all of those things for themselves. It is not, I'm not a floofy hippie tree hugger. I want a nice world for me, right? And you all should want a nice world for you too. So if it means spending a little more, maybe buying fewer things, spending a little more money on clothing that is made of natural fibers and synthetic fibers, we should do that. Unfortunately, this brings us full circle to my conversation about poverty. I get that there are many people in the world who are very, very impoverished. They cannot afford natural fibers because natural fibers are in our world much more expensive than synthetics are, right? So they can't afford that. So they have to buy clothing that is made of those petrochemicals, which is another reason why we should be working to lift those people out of poverty. Again, selfishly. Selfishly, I want everyone to be comfortable enough that they can afford to have good quality clothing, good quality shoes, eat well, sustainably farm, right? Again, it's all selfish. If everyone has enough, then crime rates go down, environmental burden goes down. It makes a better world for me, right? This is all selfish. I'm not a bleeding heart philanthropist. Okay, I am a bleeding heart philanthropist, but also I'm a selfish one. I just want to put that out there. So yes, if you can afford it, if you are if you are financially in a place where you can indeed afford to buy fewer things, more high quality, made of natural materials, I highly encourage you to do so, if you can. Otherwise, I know that times are tough. Times are tough everywhere in the world right now, and they're getting tougher in places like the US. So no judgment if you can't and you don't. However, if you have resources and you intentionally still choose to just buy a lot of shit that pollutes the environment, I will judge you 100%. But I understand that circumstances being what they are, some people have no choice. The choice is go naked or wear synthetic fibers, then you're going to wear synthetic fibers, obviously. Yeah. Okay. Smash capitalism for our own self-interest. Yeah. 100% twitchy. It's not, this whole, you should only care about yourself. I do care about myself. Thank you. I do happen to care about other people as well, because I was raised to be an empathetic citizen of a community and the world, and not just to be a selfish bitch. But also selfishly, I want a nice world for me. And to have a nice world for me, there has to be a nice world for everyone. Yeah, it's sometimes frustrating that that people don't get that they don't understand that part of it. It's water, our water systems, our aquatic ecosystems are all interconnected, right? Whether it's groundwater, whether it's ocean water, whether it's the rivers and the lakes, it doesn't matter. They're all interconnected. So shit that happens in India ultimately impacts me, right? Shit that happens in the US ultimately impacts India. Ultimately impacts Greenland for certain. And I know more recent, I'm not even talking about the dumpster fire that is the piece of shit in the White House right now. So yeah, there's a lot of good reasons to want not just my own people, but everyone to live more sustainably. The air doesn't just, with the exception of certain valleys where the air does pull, I'm thinking, looking at you, Los Angeles, for the most part, the air that is breathed in India will eventually be the air that is breathed in Korea, will eventually be the air that is breathed in Washington, D.C., right? It's all connected. So the pollution that is emitted in Mumbai will eventually impact people who are living in Sydney, right? That's why we should care what everyone does. We do not live in little micro islands with, bubbles, micro environments surrounded by bubble walls that contain the water and the air and the pollutants. That's not how our environment works. That's not how the earth works. Let me see. My own issue is that you cannot find the type of more natural black wool that would have been worn, as most wools are dyed with modern dyes. Yeah, twitchy, 100%. It can be, so dye stuffs, yeah. Dye stuffs are, in part, depending on the dye stuff, can be a problem for environmental pollution, because when fabrics break down, especially these synthetic fabrics, the dye stuffs do end up in the environment as well. Yeah, and they can be problematic. And then the fish consume them, and then our fish ends up toxic. It's a real problem. I mean, that's the other thing, like the way we pollute our water and our air, because the pollutants in the air ultimately end up often in the ocean, and then they end up eaten by fish, right? So then we have these fish, and these fish, which we would like to eat, are high in mercury and other heavy metals and have cancer and all of these things, all from our industrial lifestyle. Again, I would like to make those fish so they are no longer full of heavy metals, because I'm certain life will also be happier for the fish without the heavy metals. But for me, I can eat them and not also develop heavy metal toxicity. That's a good thing for everyone. But greed is greed, and the oligarchs don't care, because they can afford mountain fortresses with bubbles around them and a constant supply of fresh water and fresh air and food from their hydroponic private food growing facilities. So yeah, they don't care as long as they get theirs. Yep. The natural ones are often banned, restricted as dangerous rather than the toxic modern ones. Yeah, Takeda, you're not wrong, which is really funny, because most of the natural dyes are just plants, and plants that grow like weeds everywhere. It is really funny. Yeah, I mean, granted, lead is a natural material, so full circle, not all natural materials are salubrious, are healthful, right? Mercury, lead, arsenic, all very natural and naturally occurring, but not good for us. So I get it. But also, saffron as a dye stuff is natural, and as far as I know, not bad for the environment. But yeah, Takeda, you're right. A lot of the natural ones do end up getting banned for a variety of reasons. Some of them good, some of them not good. Yeah. I would love to start a tartan weaving mill here in the USA. Pendleton actually weaves tartan. Weaves a variety of tartans at its mill in Oregon. So it is possible. It won't be cheap, but it is possible. And actually, if any environment were prime for that, I think the circumstances these days, increasingly people are shifting from mass consumption to consumption of fewer handmade, quality made, locally made items. So this could be an environment in which that would be a good thing, Kevin, except for the fact that the US economy is tanking at the level of the actual people who would consume those items, right? Because the rich don't consume, they hoard. They consume very little relative to the amount of resources that they actually have. And also because, again, they can purchase items that will last forever. So the people who actually drive the economy, the middle class, that's almost gone in the US. It's pretty depleted. So you might not have you might have a decreasing base of customers for a tartan production in the US. We'll see what happens over the next 10 years or so. By the way, tartan, it's a fun word. Tartan in the Middle Ages and Renaissance did not mean tartan. The word tartan, tartine, tartane, actually comes from the French in the 13th century, and it makes its way into English first. And it was actually a fine weave of silk. And it was a silk blend. So it was silk, I think silk and cotton was one of the blends, actually. And so eventually, even throughout the Middle Ages, that word crops up as not meaning wool fabric in a striped pattern. It crops up as silk. I don't know when exactly it switches to meaning wool with a striped pattern of various types. But in a medieval context, if you see someone talking about their tartane, buying tartane, it is not tartan. It's one of these classic cases of false friends where the medieval word bears almost no resemblance to its modern usage. The only similarity is that it's fabric. That's it. That's it. And it seems it might originally come from the implication being that the silk comes from the Levant, from the Tatars. Right? So it's woven by this semi-mythical people somewhere east, right? And so it gets that name, and that name actually kind of adds to its mystique and its saleability, because now it's tartan, right? It's this exotic fabric from this exotic people who may be the descendants of the Amazons, so just a note of warning about words. Words don't never assume that a word in a medieval context is what that word means modernly. Kilt is another great example of that. We've talked about kilt a lot on this show, right? So kilt originally just meant to truss something up, and the word is actually Norwegian, middle Norwegian originally, and it comes to English through that connection. And so to kilt something up, meant to tuck it up under your belt. And so it isn't even a noun in the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. It's a verb. The entire time it's a verb or it's an adjective. And they talk about garments being kilted. But what they mean when they talk about a kilted garment is it's what women were doing with their skirts. And in Scotland, the word kilted or kilt, nearly kilted, the verb kilt almost always refers to women doing it in the Scottish records that I've seen. It's always women doing it. They're kilting up their skirts. They're kilting, mostly their skirts. They're kilting up their skirts. They're occasionally kilting their arised. But what that means is that's that big giant rectangular blanket they were wearing. They put it belt around their waist, and then they pulled the arised up through it to kilt it over the belt. Right. So yeah, the meaning of words changes with time and context. Oh no, that is the last thing I need. My Scottish friend finding out that he can wear a cotton silk blend kilt. He would be all over that. Well, not in the Middle Ages. He can't wear a kilt in the Middle Ages at all. It didn't exist. The first evidence of what would later become the Great Kilt, right? That is at the very end of the 16th century, and it is a giant rectangle of fabric that is built. But this gentleman, he's wearing hosen and he's wearing a doublet, And his hosen are rolled down around his knees, I will grant you, but he's also wearing trunk hosen. So his hosen, because in that era, men were wearing lower hosen and nether hosen and upper hosen. The upper hosen were like trunk hosen or pluderhosen, right? So he's wearing pluderhosen or trunk hosen, and his nether hosen have been rolled down around his knees and gartered. And around that whole outfit, he's wearing a doublet and he's wearing a shirt. And on top of that, he's wearing this elaborately draped long rectangle of fabric that's kind of tucked around one of his arms, actually. And it's very clearly he's trying to keep warm. But he's wearing that all around these other garments. So this idea that, 16th century Scottish men are wandering around in just a kilt, no documentation for it, sadly. And even then, it's not a kilt. It's probably looked like the amount of draping that this particular man had. It's got to be at least 7 meters long, or I don't think he would have had enough to accomplish this many turns and tucks. But it's more like a sophisticated way of swathing his body to keep himself warm, but also still allowing him enough freedom of movement of his arms to actually do things like access his sword. No paranoia in 16th century Scotland or anywhere else in Europe for that matter. None at all, of course. Yeah. But yeah, the original tartan, like a whole bunch of different spellings, especially on that second syllable. Yeah, seems like it was silk, and possibly some of them were even a silk cotton blend, which might be the origin possibly of the striped effect, because if you have two different fibers, then even if they're the same color, not necessarily from the same dye bath, because you couldn't dye them the same way, it might create a striated effect. But if they're two different colors, then it definitely could create a striated effect. We just don't know. There's not enough detail on the sources from the 13th century to really tell us. We haven't found a fabric like that, right? The earliest tartans we have aren't from Scotland. Tartans, meaning, fabric that has some kind of stripes and some kind of square or check fashion, right? It's not even Scottish. It's from a bunch of other places in Europe, because it's not, that style of weaving fabric is just not a uniquely Scottish concept. And we know that in 14th century Catalonia, for instance, one of the fashionable fabric choices was what we would modernly call a tartan, but that's Italy and that's Spain. But almost no visual evidence for it in Scotland in the same era. How funny is that? I'm not saying that they didn't, because Scottish fashion history is frustrating to study for a couple of reasons. One, those fucking Protestants, and yes, I said it, I dropped an F-bomb, but that's how I feel. Those fucking Protestants and their fucking Reformation. Fuck you, Protestants, fuck you, Reformation. I stand by that until the day I die. Fucked up so much. Yes, you can tell how I feel about this topic. Sorry for anyone who never hears me speak that way, because I don't often speak that way except when I'm super angry, and I'm super angry about this. Because all throughout Europe, those fucking Protestants painted over art. If we're lucky, they painted over it. If we're unlucky, they pulled it off of the walls, they destroyed it, they burnt it, they tore it apart, they shattered it. All of that papist art from the church, the art that depicted people in real clothing next to saints in fantastical clothing, the art that showed us details from daily life from those places. So Scotland, those fucking Calvinists destroyed. I mean, they burnt books. They burnt gorgeous illustrated. This is how upset I am. I lose the speech. They burnt gorgeous illuminated manuscripts because they were associated with the church. Right. All of that art, all of that Scottish art, gone forever because of those fucking Protestants and their fucking retrograde religious beliefs. Right. So what that means is, ladies and gentlemen, it's much harder to study the fashion history of pre-modern Scotland than it is to study other places that didn't have fucking Protestants who destroyed everything. So there is a study that is underway, and I think the results are about to be published. That is an in-depth documentary study about medieval Scottish fashion, and it's funded by Historic Scotland. And so I'm hoping that's going to come out soon, and we will have a lot more illumination about the realities of medieval Scottish fashion. A bunch of archaeological digs have been conducted recently in cities like Perth and Galloway that have unearthed a treasure trove of not necessarily whole garments, but textiles that point to daily life. And they point to Scotland being so much better connected to the European continent than anyone assumed. So this idea that there was some kind of nationals clothing in medieval Scotland isn't borne up by the documentary evidence or the archaeological evidence or the trade ties, which we know existed heavily, or the dynastic connections. Right, so I'm looking forward to this study coming out. I reached out a year ago, actually, to find out about it, and they told me it was almost ready to be published, so I should reach out again and see if it's been published, and if so, can I get a copy, please? Yep. So many manuscripts and accounts just disappeared into the Protestant fires. They so did, Twitchy. They so did. And I still feel a certain way about that, as you can all tell. Let me see. Yep, back to the topic of plaids. Yeah, as Takeda says, Iberian Peninsula, Gaul, Germanic lands, Italy, Poland, Czechia, Ukraine, Illyria, Turkey, they all had tartan-like plaids all the way back to East Asia. And yes, we actually have, there's a tomb, some of you may have heard of that tomb or read about that tomb that was excavated in Western China, which has mummies in it, which has really well preserved mummies, and they are so Western. They've got red hair, or I think it was originally blonde, but it changed to red. And their mummies were so well preserved. I think some of their eyes were still preserved, and they had blue eyes, and they were wearing very Western European style tunics and trousers, 2,000-year-old, and they were wearing plaid. They were wearing plaid. So yeah, 100%. I mean, it makes sense if you, especially on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, you have two sets of yarn. You don't necessarily have enough, two different colors of yarn. You don't necessarily have enough in any one color to make a long enough length of fabric. So you're going to combine your two colors of yarn. You're going to make it into a pretty pattern, because humans are peacocks and always have been. Basically, since we climbed down from the trees in Africa, maybe before that, we have been peacocks. And so you're going to combine that into a nice pattern of contrasting colors. And there you go. And thus tartan was created, but it wasn't called tartan. Your 10-minute rule to comment matches your need to pontificate. Okay. Okay. So I'm sorry for any of you. No. Okay. Kigantul. I know the Tartars were not mythical, but the medieval understanding of them was semi-mythical, right? They're under the medieval Western European understand of the Tartars. Yes, they were not mythical. I know that, but what they understood about them was semi-mythical, and some of the things they said about them were absolutely, completely mythical, right? Yeah, I don't need to study more history, please, baby. I really don't. I study a lot of history, primary sources, and I understand medieval people better than you do, apparently, because I've read a lot of Western travel vlogs about the Tatars. Sometimes they call them Tatars, sometimes they call them Tartars, and sometimes those are two different peoples, actually, historically. No, I know they weren't mythical, but the medieval mindset is that they were. And that 10-minute rule is specifically for trolls, because generally trolls won't hang around for 10 minutes before they can comment. Yeah, that's what it is. Got nothing to do with my need to pontificate. Most trolls are lazy, and if they can't comment trash in the first few minutes, they go on, they move onward. But, you know, mileage will vary. Yeah, seriously, I'm sorry, but yeah, the medieval people absolutely had the medieval people's understanding of their world was semi-legendary and semi-mythical. I'm talking about Key. I'm talking about how medieval people understood their world. Medieval, I'm talking about the French, I'm talking about the English, I'm talking about the Italians, I'm talking about the Iberians. Their view was that their view of the Tatars, the things they said about them, many of them were wrong, were inaccurate. This is the semi-mythical view of them. And in some cases, what they said about them was 100% myth. It wasn't real. That isn't what the Tatars actually did. Travel, that's my point. I didn't say, that's why I call them semi-mythical in the view of the Europeans. You seem to be really triggered by this. I'm moving on. So yeah. And actually, travel vlogs are one of the ways, historical travel vlogs are one of the big sources of history, right? Especially in cases where records have otherwise not survived or have been, or never existed. Unfortunately, that means that a lot of our understanding of peoples throughout time is not necessarily correct because it only comes to us through the eyes of a traveler who may or may not have either observed things correctly or may have made things up whole cloth. Yes, Key. Again, you seem to be a little dense there, Key. You seem to not be listening to the words I'm saying. So yeah, we're moving on. For instance, Herodotus. Herodotus said a lot of interesting things about a lot of different peoples, and it turns out that a lot of what he said was wrong. Right. And unfortunately, historians like Herodotus, historical historians like Herodotus, are actually responsible for a lot of the myths that people now have about a variety of history. It might have been Herodotus. It was either Herodotus or one of the other ancient Greek historian travelers who claimed that it was slaves who built the pyramids in Egypt, for instance. Yeah. Key, you've clearly been triggered. Yeah, Herodotus. Herodotus has all sorts of, you want to talk about mythology? You want to talk about a history that is definitely bordering on mythology? 100%. 100%. Yeah, Herodotus, if you ever want to learn about how things weren't, read Herodotus. But what's interesting about Herodotus is it reveals a lot about the psychology of the people at the time for the audience for which he was writing. There's so many fascinating stories. And I would definitely, and this also brings us to the modern idea of history as being a disciplined subject of study, of objectively analyzing a variety of sources and coming to conclusions. That's modern historiography, right? We are historically, the dividing line between history and storytelling was almost non-existent. Right? It was as often as not, a history of such and such was intended to entertain and grip its audience, and in many cases intended to convey a certain specific kind of morality. Right? Yeah, I mean, yeah, Herodotus, exactly. Herodotus may or may not have been lying on purpose. He could have been to in some cases to convey a specific point or to present a certain moral depiction of a people whom he either respected or didn't respect. Or yeah, he could just be relying on inaccurate information himself in some cases. Yeah, so that by the time Herodotus was writing, the pyramids were already 2,000 years old. And so the folk memory of how those were built was inevitably going to be inaccurate. And so if he travels to Egypt and he's relying on what people are telling him about them, that's going to be inaccurate 100%. But this brings us back to the point of historical histories is not necessarily to be a faithful representation of history, but to present something that is politically expedient, to present a ruler in a certain light, beneficial or deleterious, depending on the political situation in which the writer finds themselves. So we really have to interpret those historical histories from that light. Ramen Noodling says, I appreciate the way you break down how people of the time viewed things versus what we know things were, like the archaeological historical evidence. It's super interesting and adds nuance. Yeah, Ramen. And some people apparently aren't smart enough to appreciate nuance. I'm not pointing any fingers, but I am. Yeah, there is an absolute difference between what we understand of geography and historical peoples and when people in any given era understand of it. But hell, ask your average, go to America, go to any city and ask your average person, let me see, who the Mongols are, right? Ask them what, and see what comes, what they tell you. Ask them who, ask them about pick any of the Amazonian tribes, ask them about them and what they know about them. And you're probably going to get about the same, you're going to get in many cases the same level of myth making as medieval historians conveyed or medieval people would have understood. Right. And that's when I say that in that the medieval view of the Tatars or the Tartars is semi-mythical to sometimes mythical. It's true. Not that there weren't real people who were that, but the Western Europeans just didn't necessarily understand who those people were. They didn't even always put them in the right place. A lot of medieval people thought the Tatars came from the eastern steppes. They used that word often synonymously for Mongols. So, again, key, you need a little more nuance in your understanding of history. Yeah, the same goes for how we tell history today too. Historiography is interesting to get into. Yeah, Ting Li, 100%. 100%. Historiography itself is interesting. And for those who don't know what historiography is, it's the history of history. Basically, it's how history is recorded, it's how it's recounted, it's how it's passed down. Yeah, I find historiography absolutely fascinating. But the more, and it's a little frustrating, it's a bottomless pit, right? The more I learn about how history is recorded and interpreted and understood, the less sure I am about what we know. The more I know, the less I know. And I think that's common in all my life, right? The more I understand about a subject, the less I know about the subject. And that almost sometimes feels like an overwhelming, an awning abyss of nihilism. But yeah, there it is. Kevin says, we're very fortunate to have the tools and sources available that we've been able to get a more accurate understanding of history. Imagine about how much more we wouldn't know without that. Oh, Kevin, so much. It is, I would say that we are living one of the ways in which we are definitely better off than anyone else who's come before us is in our study of almost any subject. We have so many more resources that are democratically available. And I mean that in the sense of anyone can access them as long as they have internet. As long as you have internet access, there are so many more resources now, primary sources that have been digitized and transcribed and translated, right, that are available to anyone who can just get an internet connection. So many more than ever. If I had started my exploration of history, let me see how to say this. If the tools that are available now had been available when I started 40 years ago, oh dear, oh dear, we're almost done. Anyway, I'll finish this thought. When I started 40 years ago, then I would be so much further on in my exploration of medieval material culture, in medieval recreation, and my knowledge and understanding of history, full stop. So I envy people who are starting their journey now because they are standing on the shoulders of so many giants that weren't even available for me to stand on 40 years ago when I was a little girl, right? Yeah, so many more resources. Okay, everyone. We're about to, my broadcasting device is complaining that it is famished, and so it's about to shut off. So I would like to thank you all so much for participating today. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed. I'd like to thank my super chatters and all of those who gave me gifts. I'd like to thank my channel members and my patrons on Patreon. If you're interested in supporting my work in a more financial manner while also getting access to a wide array of extra content, extra digital resources. I share my research directly with you all as we go along. Videos, tutorials, content that isn't made accessible to anyone else. Consider becoming a channel member or a patron on Patreon. If I got a question and I didn't answer it, please pop it in the comments under the video when it posts. otherwise, everyone, until next time, may your historical explorations be creative and pleasantly surprising. Until next time, everyone, stay creative.